Hey everyone, welcome back to Omni Wizard. Get ready for an amazing tale. What if Harry Potter was bitten by a radioactive spider before his Hogwarts letter? Smash that like button and subscribe for more. Here we go. Chapter 1, What Lives in the Dark? The spider found him on a Tuesday. Harry hadn't done anything particularly interesting that day, hadn't exploded anything, hadn't accidentally turned a teacher's wig blue or made Dudley's hair fall out in patches the way it had last March. He'd come home from school, eaten the half portion of cold shepherd's pie Aunt Petunia left on the counter with the kind of deliberate precision that communicated how little she wanted to be in the same room as him. And then he'd been sent to his cupboard before 7 o'clock because Dudley wanted to watch something on the television and Harry's presence in the living room apparently made the picture go funny. The cupboard smelled like old trainers and dust, and the faint metallic tang of the pipes that ran along the low ceiling. Harry had long since memorized every inch of it. The knot in the wood above his left ear when he lay on his cot, the exact distance from his pillow to the coats hanging on the far hook, the way sound carried differently through the right wall versus the left. He'd spent enough time in here to know it the way other kids knew their bedrooms. He was reading by torchlight, a library book about deep-sea fish he'd checked out mostly because the cover looked interesting and partly because Dudley had loudly announced he'd never read anything about deep-sea fish and therefore the book was stupid. The anglerfish chapter was genuinely brilliant. Harry had read it 3 times. He almost missed the spider entirely. It dropped from somewhere near the pipe joint above his head, swinging on a thread so thin it was nearly invisible in the torchlight, and landed on the back of his right hand with a weight barely heavier than a breath. Harry felt it, the delicate specific pressure of 6 legs and then 8, and went very still the way you go still when something small and potentially irritated lands on you. He looked down. The spider was unlike anything he'd seen before. And Harry, who had spent considerable time in this cupboard observing the regular spider population, considered himself something of an amateur expert. This one was small, about the size of a 2-pence coin, but the color was wrong, not the usual dusty brown or mottled gray of house spiders. This one shimmered. That was the only word for it. Its abdomen caught the torchlight and threw it back in colors that didn't quite belong to each other, deep violet bleeding into a green so dark it was almost black, and at the center of its body was a marking that looked unsettlingly like an hourglass made of silver. Its eyes, all 8 of them, were catching the light in a way that made Harry feel, absurdly, like it was looking back. "Hello," he said quietly because he was alone and 10 years old and the cupboard was boring, so he talked to spiders sometimes. "You're new." The spider moved. Not skittering, not the frantic sideways dash of a startled house spider. It moved deliberately, walking up toward his wrist with the careful, considered pace of something that knew exactly where it was going. Then it bit him. It didn't hurt, which was somehow worse than if it had. There was a sharp pinch, precise as a needle, and then a deep spreading warmth that moved up his arm faster than it should have, faster than anything physical had a right to travel. Harry sucked in a breath and watched the spider retreat, not in panic, but with the unhurried dignity of something that had completed a task, and disappear back into the gap between the pipe and the ceiling. The warmth kept moving. By the time it reached his chest, Harry was flat on his back on the cot, torch dropped and forgotten, staring at the knot in the wood above his left ear. The warmth wasn't painful. It was more like, he struggled for the word, more like recognition. Like something in his chest that had always been there, but dormant, was suddenly being introduced to something new, and the 2 of them were deciding, without asking his opinion, to become one thing instead of 2. He passed out somewhere around the point where the warmth reached his spine. When he woke up, 6 hours had passed according to the green digital clock on the shelf, and he felt like every cell in his body had been individually taken apart and reassembled by someone who knew what they were doing but had worked quickly. Sore in a strange, deep way, muscles aching not from damage but from change. He lay still for a long moment, cataloging himself. Then he put his hand flat against the wooden wall beside his cot. When he pulled it away, it didn't come away cleanly. He stared at his palm, looked at the wall. Pressed again, deliberately this time, concentrating on whatever that new warm thing in his chest was, and this time when he pulled his hand away, he pulled slowly and he felt it. A faint but undeniable adhesion, like his skin had decided the wall was an option worth considering. "Huh," Harry said to the empty cupboard. He spent the rest of the night figuring out what else had changed. That was in September, and by the time October arrived, Harry had stopped being surprised and started being curious, which was a more useful state to be in. He could stick to walls, not just his hands, any surface, though hands and feet worked best. He discovered this by accident when he'd been startled by Aunt Petunia's sudden shriek about the dishes, and had flinched backward, and found himself pressed flat against the kitchen ceiling like a very confused, very frightened fly. Getting down had taken 20 minutes of careful, sweaty maneuvering, and he'd only managed it because everyone had gone into the lounge to watch the news. That was the last time he was startled. Because the thing that took longer to understand but mattered more, was the sense. He didn't have a good word for it at first. It wasn't sight or hearing, nothing as simple as that. It was more like a pressure at the base of his skull, a kind of awareness that tugged at him a half-second before anything happened. Dudley's fist coming at the back of his head in the corridor at school, he'd already moved before the swing began, stepping aside with a fluidity that confused both of them. A car running a red light when he was crossing the road, his body had already stopped moving before his conscious mind registered the engine sound. A falling tile from the school roof during lunch, he'd caught it one-handed without looking up from his chips. That last one had caused something of a scene, but he'd gotten good at playing it off, pretending, laughing it away. He'd had a lifetime of practice being invisible after all, and invisible was easier when the alternative was a series of questions nobody would believe the answers to. The strength came in gradually over November. He discovered it when he picked up Dudley's racing bicycle to move it out of the garden shed doorway, and registered with distant alarm that he'd lifted it with one hand and wasn't really feeling the weight. He set it down very carefully and stood there thinking about that for a while. Then he went and found a stone in the garden, the heaviest one he could see, half buried by the fence, and dug it up and held it. Definitely heavy, definitely not a problem. He could run too, faster than he should be able to, faster than the other kids at school by a margin he had to actively suppress during PE because the PE teacher had already given him one too many looks. And then there was the thing he'd started calling threads. He didn't fully understand it yet and wouldn't until much later, but occasionally when he was angry or frightened or concentrating very hard, something came out of his hands. Silvery white, sticky. Strong enough that, when he'd accidentally fired a strand at the cupboard door, it had taken him 20 minutes to get it off, and the wood had splintered in the process. He practiced that one exclusively in the garden at night, which involved climbing out of the cupboard window he'd figured out could be opened silently if you lifted the frame at exactly the right angle. Aunt Petunia thought the garden shed wall was being invaded by some kind of industrial fungi. By December, he was doing pull-ups on the pipe above his cot, one-handed eventually, and reading every library book he could get his hands on about spiders, about physics, about the biology of venom, about anything that might explain what was happening to him. The books gave him vocabulary but not answers, because nothing in any of them described a spider like the one that had bitten him. He'd gone back and checked the pipe joint sealing gap 3 times. It was gone. He named the process simply his power. Not a gift, not a curse, his, which made it categorically different from anything else in his life that had ever been thrust upon him. He turned 11 in July and cooked his own birthday breakfast while the Dursleys slept, sitting on the kitchen counter with his feet dangling because the counter seemed as reasonable a seat as any, and looked out the window at the garden in the early morning light and thought, this year is going to be different. He had no idea how right he was or in how many directions. The letters started arriving on a Tuesday morning in late July. Harry's internal calendar had solidified considerably since the bite. His sense of time sharpened the same way his sense of everything else had, and he knew something was different before he saw them. The spider sense, or whatever he decided to call the pressure at the base of his skull, had been quietly active all morning. Not urgent, not the sharp move now of physical danger, but the low, steady hum of something significant is approaching. He'd learned to pay attention to the difference. He was in the kitchen making toast when the flap went. The letter hit the floor. Harry looked at it from across the room. He could see, and this was another new thing, his vision had sharpened considerably, the green ink from 10 feet away. He could read his own name without moving closer. Mr. H. Potter, the cupboard under the stairs, 4 Privet Drive, Little Winging, Surrey. He walked over, picked it up, turned it over. Heavy parchment. A wax seal he didn't recognize, a crest with 4 animals. He had the distinct sense the letter knew where he lived very specifically, which was either wonderful or deeply strange, and in his experience those two things usually came together. He opened it, read it again, stood very still for approximately 15 seconds. Then he put the letter in his pocket, finished making his toast, and sat at the kitchen table eating it methodically while he thought through the implications. By the time Vernon Dursley came thundering down the stairs and then came to a sudden, rigid stop in the kitchen doorway staring at the stack of letters that had continued to arrive. There were 11 now, in a neat pile Harry had arranged by the fridge. Harry had already decided several things, none of which included letting Vernon Dursley make any meaningful decisions on his behalf. Those are mine, Harry said. Vernon went puce. His mouth opened and closed. Now listen here. They're addressed to me, Harry continued pleasantly. The cupboard under the stairs, very specifically. He looked at Vernon with the calm, level gaze he'd been perfecting for 10 months, the one that occasionally made Dudley's friends walk slightly wide around him. That seems like something worth talking about, don't you think? The conversation that followed was the first one in Harry's memory that ended with Vernon Dursley sitting down heavily in a chair rather than looming. Harry didn't raise his voice once. He didn't need to. He simply looked at his uncle with that quiet steadiness and asked, in a series of very reasonable questions, why there were letters addressed to a specific room in a specific house that his uncle apparently already knew about, and what exactly his uncle intended to do about them, and whether his uncle had considered that Harry was 11 now and also apparently expected somewhere. The whole thing lasted 4 minutes. By the end of it, Vernon had confirmed, with the crumpled, deflated air of a man who has realized something essential has shifted, that yes, there was a school. Yes, it was real. Yes, Harry's mother had gone there. No, the Dursleys did not want to discuss this further. Yes, Harry could go. Petunia didn't come down the whole time. Harry suspected she'd been listening from the stairs. That evening, after the Dursleys had conspicuously avoided him for the better part of 6 hours, Harry took the Hogwarts letter out again and read it carefully, all of it, including the supply list. He had no money. He knew he had no money, had known it for as long as he'd known that the Dursleys had money, and he did not. But the letter mentioned Gringotts, and Vernon's face had done a particular thing when Harry mentioned the letter earlier. A flinch that suggested information the man definitely had and definitely hadn't planned to share. Harry knocked on the lounge door. "I need money for the supplies," he said through it. "The letter says there's a Gringotts account. I'll need to go to Diagon Alley." A long pause, then Vernon in a strangled voice, "Hagrid will come." Harry blinked. "Who's Hagrid?" Another pause. "He'll come, just wait." Harry waited. He was good at waiting. He'd had a lot of practice. Hagrid came the next morning, crashing through the door of number 4 with the kind of cheerful, massive energy that instantly rearranged the emotional atmosphere of any room he entered. He was enormous, not freakishly large, just vastly larger than anyone Harry had ever been in the same room with hands like dustbin lids and a beard that seemed to be its own ecosystem, and eyes the warm, sharp brown of someone who found the world genuinely interesting. He stopped when he saw Harry, stared. His eyes went a bit bright. "Harry," he said in a voice that rumbled like a friendly earthquake. "Last time I saw you were jus a baby, look at ya." Harry looked at him steadily. "You knew my parents." It wasn't a question. The man's face had too much history in it for that. Hagrid's expression moved through about 4 things at once before settling on something warm and sad and certain. "Knew 'em well. Best people I ever met if you want the truth of it. Your dad would've," he stopped, cleared his throat. "Well, got a lot to tell ya. Thought I'd be the one to has anyone." He glanced at the Dursleys, who had evacuated to the lounge with the efficiency of people who wanted very much to not be present for this conversation. "Have they told ya anything?" "Almost nothing," Harry said. "Sit down, though, I've got questions." Hagrid sat, the kitchen chair protested dramatically and talked, and Harry listened. He was a good listener. Better since the bite, because listening was just another form of the awareness, of tuning into the vibrations of a situation and reading what they meant. He listened to Hagrid describe the wizarding world with the unfiltered enthusiasm of someone who loved it unreservedly, and he filed away each piece of information with the methodical thoroughness he developed over 10 months of investigating his own impossible situation. Magic. Real. A school. He'd been expected for a decade. His parents hadn't died in a car crash, murdered by someone called Voldemort, and Harry noted that Hagrid flinched violently at the name while Harry himself felt nothing except the cool curiosity of the unfamiliar. He was famous, apparently, for surviving. The lightning bolt scar on his forehead was evidence of that survival. He touched the scar automatically. He'd never thought much about it. "Can I see your wand?" Harry asked when Hagrid paused. Hagrid blinked. Well, technically I'm not supposed to." He pulled out an umbrella with a slightly guilty air. Not exactly a wand, but Harry felt it immediately. That thing in his chest, the warm, dual-natured core that had existed since September, leaned toward the umbrella the way a compass needle leans toward north. He could feel the magic in it, not see it, not hear it. Feel it the way he felt the vibrations of footsteps through floorboards as an actual physical sensation in his sternum. He'd been able to do that for months. He just hadn't had a word for it until now. "Magic feels like pressure," Harry said, mostly to himself. "Like something pushing outward." Hagrid stared at him. "How'd you—" "I can feel it," Harry said simply, meeting Hagrid's eyes. "I've been able to for a while. I didn't know what it was." Hagrid's expression cycled through several more things. He'd have to get used to that, Harry thought. He had a feeling that was going to be a common reaction. Diagon Alley was extraordinary. Harry walked through the leaky cauldron, the sudden visibility of it, the shift from ignored to recognized, the way people turned and whispered and nudged each other with the same quiet steadiness he'd brought to everything else. People were staring. People had been staring at him for different reasons for months. He'd learned to just exist through it, What genuinely caught his attention was the magic, everywhere. Rich, layered, endlessly varied, the compressed, ancient weight of the brick wall before Hagrid knocked the right pattern into it. The vast ambient hum of Gringotts like standing next to a very old, very powerful engine. The dizzying riot of competing magical signatures flooding out of every shop in the alley when they emerged from the bank. His sense worked overtime, cataloging and sorting, and he found it extraordinary rather than overwhelming because it was fascinating the way the anglerfish book had been fascinating, the way everything genuinely interesting was. He had money. More than he'd expected, the vault had contained trunks of gold coins and silver and bronze, more than he could meaningfully imagine spending, and Hagrid had helped him fill a bag with what he needed. He tried not to think about how long the Dursleys had known about it and hadn't mentioned it. He tried and mostly succeeded. They got the uniform, the cauldron, the ingredients. They got an owl, a snowy white one who regarded Harry with her large amber eyes and immediately seemed to decide he would do. Because Hagrid insisted, with the particular insistence of someone who knew what they were talking about. He named her Hedwig from a library book about medieval saints he'd read in February because she looked like the kind of creature who deserved a name with weight to it. Then Ollivander's. The shop was different from the others. Quieter, which should have meant less, but the magical signature coming off it was deeper and stranger than anything else in the alley. Harry stood in the doorway and felt the weight of 10,000 magical objects pressing gently and variably against his chest, like standing in a room full of heartbeats. Mr. Ollivander appeared out of the dim without any apparent preamble, silver eyes fixing on Harry with the unsettling precision of someone who saw more than the surface. "Harry Potter," he said softly, "I wondered when I'd see you." They tried wands. Many wands, more than Harry suspected was normal, based on the way Ollivander's expression shifted from expectant to thoughtful to something approaching fascinated. Each one Harry picked up gave him a clear, immediate no, not a feeling he could easily explain but definite. Wrong pitch, wrong frequency, didn't match. Curious, Ollivander murmured, the 15th or so wand failing to produce anything except a small shower of blue sparks that seemed almost apologetic. "Very curious. Your core, Mr. Potter, I can almost," he stopped, tilted his head. Looked at Harry's right hand, specifically the wrist, where the spider bite scar was a small, faint starburst of silver. "May I?" Harry extended his hand. Ollivander didn't touch it, just leaned close, and his silver eyes sharpened. "Interesting," he said very quietly. "Very interesting indeed." He straightened up and went back into the shelves, and this time he was gone for nearly 3 minutes. He returned with a single box, moving more carefully than he had with any of the others. "Holly and Phoenix feather 11 inches, he said. "It should be right. It has always wanted, but then it may also want because there is something in you, Mr. Potter, that it might have to share space with. This is not unprecedented, but very nearly." Harry took the wand. The warmth that moved through him was both deeply familiar and entirely new, the same gold warmth he'd felt in his chest since September, but orchestrated now, focused, like the difference between a general sound and a specific note. The wand and the other thing in him recognized each other, didn't fight, adjusted. Harmonized reluctantly and then willingly. He gave it a small flick. A cascade of gold and silver sparks erupted from the tip in a spiral that shouldn't have been physically possible. They moved in a helix, and where they fell they vanished with a sound like plucked string. Ollivander pressed both hands to the counter. He looked for the first time genuinely taken aback. "What was that?" Hagrid breathed from the doorway. "That," Ollivander said slowly, "is a young man whose magic has 2 voices instead of 1. He fixed Harry with that silver gaze. "Be careful, Mr. Potter, not because power is dangerous, power is simply power. Be careful because the wizarding world has very limited experience with things it cannot categorize. You will confuse people. Some of them will find it easier to be afraid than to be curious." He paused. "Fortunately, fear and curiosity are both honest reactions. It is the ones who are neither that you should watch." Harry turned the wand over in his fingers, feeling the hum of it settle into the background of his awareness like it had always been there. "I appreciate the advice," he said genuinely. "One more thing," Ollivander said. "The wand that gave you that scar, you and Phoenix feather 13.5 inches unyielding." His eyes didn't leave Harry's. "The phoenix whose feather is in your wand gave one other feather, only one other. It is most curious that you should be destined for this wand when another so closely related chose the one responsible for your scar." Harry looked at him steadily. "Then I suppose we'll see what happens when they meet." Ollivander's expression did something between admiration and unease. "Yes," he said softly, "I suppose we shall." The remaining weeks before September 1st passed with the specific quality of time that is simultaneously too slow and too fast. Too slow because something significant was approaching, And Harry had always been bad at waiting for things he actually wanted, and too fast because he was spending every available hour in the garden or the park pushing himself. His webs were more controlled now. He could fire them with precision up to about 20 feet, thicker or thinner depending on concentration. Thick ropes strong enough to hold his full weight in a swing, thin filaments that he could layer into a net. The magic in them made them dissolve after a few hours, which was useful for obvious reasons. He could swing across the park in 4 movements, tree to lamppost to shed roof, and land without sound. He did this at 2 in the morning when the park was empty, because he was 11 and he thought it was absolutely brilliant, and it was. He could feel Hedwig watching from her cage in the bedroom window he'd started sleeping in. The Dursleys, reorganized by their encounter with Hagrid and some presumably powerful letter that had arrived with a ministry seal, had vacated Dudley's second bedroom without meaningful discussion. Hedwig watched him swing through the park with the expression of an owl who has decided not to be surprised by anything and would like some mice. He bought her mice. He packed his trunk with the methodical thoroughness he brought to everything else, books stacked spine up, potion ingredients boxed and wrapped, robes folded with the precision of someone who hadn't had many things worth folding. He packed the library books separately with bookmarks because he intended to return them before the train. He packed the torchlight last, sliding it into the outer pocket of the trunk where he'd always kept it, and looked at the empty cupboard from the bedroom doorway for a moment. He didn't feel nostalgic for it. He felt instead the clean satisfaction of something finished. He was ready. The night before September 1st, he sat on the shed roof in the dark. He could see better in it now, another change he'd catalogued around November, and thought about Ollivander's last words, the wand that gave him his scar. A wizard called Voldemort who had killed his parents and then failed to kill him. A magical world that had been waiting for him, celebrating his survival, building something like a mythology around a baby who had simply lived. He touched the scar. Felt the faint, specific magical signature there, old and dark and other, something that had settled into the scar tissue like sediment waiting. His awareness poked at it gently the way you'd poke at a sore tooth with your tongue, not gone, dormant, something to understand eventually. He wasn't afraid of it, he was interested in it, that felt about right. He dropped off the shed roof, 9 feet, clean landing, no sound, and went inside and slept deeply and well. King's Cross was loud and human and complicated, and Harry navigated it with his trolley, his trunk, and Hedwig's cage while consulting the ticket on his letter. Platform 9 3/4 was not on any sign, which was either an oversight or a system. He suspected the latter. He walked toward platforms 9 and 10 and stood between them looking at the barrier. Brick wall, solid to all appearances. But his spider sense wasn't giving him anything, no warning, no sense of wrongness, and his magical awareness was picking up something from the other side. Something vast and enclosed and busy, the signature of many magical objects and people in a contained space. He pushed the trolley at the barrier, fell through. The world went briefly strange and then resolved into platform 9 3/4, and the Hogwarts Express was red and gleaming and magnificent, the steam rolling in great white columns, and the platform was packed with families in robes of every description, and owls were calling, and Harry stood there for one moment just taking it in. He'd spent his whole life on the outside of something without knowing what the inside was. He pushed his trolley toward the train with the quiet certainty of someone who has been outside long enough to know they're ready. A ginger-haired family was loading a mountain of luggage nearby, and as Harry passed, the eldest boy turned and gave him an apologetic grin over a pair of twins who were currently attempting to levitate each other's luggage. "Sorry about them," the boy said. "They think everything's funny." "It is, though," Harry said agreeably. "The levitation's pretty good." The boy blinked. "Percy," he introduced himself formally. "Weasley. Harry Potter." He offered his hand. Percy shook it with the slightly stunned quality of someone recalibrating their expectations. One of the twins dropped his brother's levitated trunk and said with bright interest, "Hello, Harry Potter." The other twin said with the same bright interest, "We thought you'd be taller." "I'll work on it," Harry said. They laughed. "Good ones, genuine and immediate, the kind that told you something real about a person." Harry added them to his mental catalog of people who might be worth knowing. Alongside Percy, who was clearly very earnest, and the younger red-haired boy behind him who was staring at Harry with an expression of total transparent, all that Harry found both touching and slightly alarming. He loaded his trunk with the help of 2 of the Weasley boys and settled Hedwig's cage into a compartment near the back of the train, then went back to the window to watch the platform while passengers boarded. He was good at watching. He could pick up a lot from how people moved. The spider sense had made him attentive to the vibrations of human interaction the way it made him attentive to physical danger. And so he noticed the silver-haired boy moving through the crowd with two large boys flanking him. Noticed the way the crowd opened slightly, and the boy moved through the opening with the unconscious ease of someone who'd never had to push. Noticed the quick glance the boy sent toward the train with something assessing in it, filed that away. He noticed also the girl in the corridor outside his compartment who was walking very proposedly while consulting a book and a piece of paper, and whose hair was enormous and brown, and who stopped in front of his compartment and opened it without knocking and said, "Have you seen a toad? A boy named Neville has lost one and we've been all through the front." She stopped, looked at him, looked at Hedwig. "You're not bothered about the toad?" "No," Harry agreed. "Sit down if you want. I'll help look when we've gotten moving. A toad can only go so far on a train." She sat because apparently it was a reasonable suggestion and she responded well to reasonable suggestions. "Hermione Granger," she said, and opened her book again with the air of someone who'd allocated this portion of the journey to reading and saw no reason to waste it. "Harry Potter." She looked up from the book immediately. "I know about you, of course. I've read everything available about the wizarding world and you're in several books, though the accounts vary considerably in reliability." She paused. "Sorry, that probably sounds strange." "I've read everything available too," Harry said. "There's not much. They're weirdly cagey about practical magic in the general texts." Her expression brightened the way people's expressions brighten when they find an unexpected equal. "Exactly, I thought the charms texts would have more foundational theory, but it's all very practical with minimal explanation of the underlying principles. Do you think that's intentional?" "Tradition, probably," Harry said. "Apprenticeship systems don't usually write down the tacit knowledge." She blinked rapidly, then opened her book again, but she was smiling at the page. The compartment door slid open a third time. The transparent Weasley boy stood in the doorway holding his trunk with the specific posture of someone hoping for an invitation. Harry moved Hedwig's cage 6 inches to the left and gestured at the vacant seat. "Ron, right?" Harry said. "Yeah." Ron sat with the relief of someone who hadn't been certain he was welcome. "Harry," and he looked at Hermione, who glanced up, said her name, and looked back at her book with polite efficiency. The train lurched into motion. The platform slid away. Ron turned to the window and then back to Harry with the expression of someone who has been wanting to ask several things and is not sure which to start with. "Your scar," he said, and then immediately looked embarrassed. "Sorry, Mum said not to. I wasn't." "It's fine," Harry said. "Yes, it's real. Yes, it's from Voldemort." "No, I don't remember it. It tingles sometimes." He said all of this with the same easy directness he'd learned to apply to uncomfortable topics. Just answer the question cleanly and the discomfort usually dissolved. Ron looked like Christmas had come early. "You said his name." "It's his name," Harry said. Ron opened his mouth, closed it, tried once more. "Most people don't. Most people are afraid of it," Harry said. "I know." He looked at Ron steadily. "Does the name bother you?" Ron considered this with more genuine thought than Harry expected. "A bit," he admitted. "But that's probably a bit silly, isn't it?" "It's a learned thing," Harry said. "Doesn't make it silly. I can teach you how to not flinch if you want. There's a technique." Ron stared at him, then laughed, not the polite laugh but the real one, surprised out of him. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, all right." Hermione turned a page. The train moved north through England, the sky changing above the carriage windows, and in the compartment the conversation moved and shifted and settled into the first tentative shape of something that might eventually be called friendship, not yet but approaching. Harry watched the landscape change and felt the press of his spider sense against the background of the journey, not warning him, just present. Alert. Something was coming. Something large and layered and complicated. He'd spent 10 months learning what he was. Now he was going somewhere he might learn why. He leaned back against the seat and watched the north come to meet him, and felt, for the first time in his memory, the uncomplicated satisfaction of being exactly where he was supposed to be. Chapter 2. The sorting of something new. The trolley witch had excellent chocolate frogs. Harry bought 4, partly because he was genuinely hungry. The Dursleys' farewell contribution to his journey had been a pointed absence of packed lunch, and partly because the cards inside were an interesting data source. He spread them across the compartment seat while Ron explained the trading hierarchy with the enthusiasm of someone who had been waiting his whole life for a receptive audience. Dumbledore's the rarest, obviously, but everyone says that, so everyone's looking for him, which actually makes Agrippa harder to find in practice because nobody's specifically looking. Supply and demand, Harry said, turning over a Ptolemy. Exactly, Ron pointed at him. That's exactly it. Fred and George never think about it that way, but that's exactly. He stopped, glanced at the door with a slight wariness. Don't tell them I said they don't think about things. They'd make my life horrible. Strategic omission, Harry agreed. Noted. Hermione had put her book down 20 minutes ago, which Harry suspected represented significant social investment from her, and was currently eating a pumpkin pasty with the focused attention of someone who considered eating an activity rather than an experience. She'd asked Ron 3 questions about wizarding food in the manner of someone conducting a survey, and had written 2 things in the margin of her book afterward. Harry watched the chocolate frog cards accumulate and thought about what Ollivander had said. 2 voices. He hadn't told anyone about the spider, about the bite, about the 11 months between September and now. Not Hagrid, who had talked a lot and with great feeling but hadn't really created a space for Harry to contribute specifics. Not the Weasleys at the barrier, not these 2, not yet. He was still deciding how, not because he was hiding it. He'd thought about that on the shed roof and decided that hiding it was both impractical and philosophically annoying. What was the point of having something extraordinary happen to you if you then spent all your energy making sure nobody noticed? But there was a difference between not hiding it and announcing it to people he'd met 90 minutes ago. He'd see how things went. The compartment door slid open with the specific energy of someone who'd opened enough doors confidently to make the motion a statement. The silver-haired boy from the platform filled the doorway, flanked by his 2 large companions, and ran his eyes across the compartment with the practiced efficiency of someone used to auditing rooms. His gaze landed on Harry and sharpened. "So it's true," he said. "Harry Potter, I heard you were on this train." He stepped in without being invited, which Harry noted without particular reaction. "I'm Draco Malfoy." He said it the way people say things they expect to mean something. Harry looked at him with genuine attentiveness, not the challenging stare that some people mistook it for, just the clear, direct focus he gave everything. Draco Malfoy. He'd read the name in one of the wizarding history books he'd found at Flourish and Blott's, old family, a certain set of political associations. He filed it alongside everything else. "Harry Potter," he replied pleasantly. "You already knew that." Draco blinked, a very small blink, barely perceptible, but Harry caught it. "Yes." "Well," he recovered smoothly, which suggested he was quick, which Harry added to the file. His eyes moved to Ron. Something in his face did what faces do when they've been conditioned to make a specific evaluation automatically. "Weasley." Ron went slightly pink. "Malfoy. You don't want to make friends with the wrong sort," Draco said, shifting back to Harry with what Harry recognized as a move he'd practiced, the casual redirect designed to communicate hierarchy. "I can help with that. It's important to know who's who." Harry tilted his head. "What makes someone the wrong sort?" Draco seemed mildly thrown by the question being taken literally. "Well, family, blood, background, there's a certain. Ron's family has been in the wizarding world longer than most," Harry said conversationally. "Practically all of his relatives are magical. That's not background I'd call wrong." He paused. "I was raised by muggles, by the way. My mother was muggle-born. If your metric is blood, I'm not sure I pass your test either." Draco's expression went through several things in quick succession: recalibration, the awareness that this conversation had not gone where he'd planned, and something else underneath, something younger than the performance. He looked at Harry with what might have been the beginning of genuine evaluation rather than the scripted version. "That's different," he said, with less certainty than he'd started with. The circumstances are different." "Are they?" Harry asked, still pleasant. A long pause. The 2 large boys behind Draco shifted with the uncertain energy of backup that wasn't sure what it was backing up. "Perhaps," Draco said finally, which was probably the most honest word he'd used since he opened the door. He looked at Harry for another moment with that strange assessing quality and then withdrew, not a retreat exactly, more like a strategic recalibration, and closed the compartment door behind him. Ron let out a breath. "He's smarter than he's acting," Harry said thoughtfully, turning the Ptolemy card over again. Hermione made a sound that was not quite agreement and not quite disagreement but contained both. "He's a prat," Ron said, with the feeling of someone who has historical data supporting this position. "His whole family's," he stopped, and Harry could see him actively choosing to not go down a road he'd started. "They supported you-know-who." "Voldemort," Harry said. "Yeah," Ron managed it without flinching this time, which Harry appreciated. "Most of them said they were under a curse. Imperious. Nobody could prove they weren't. But Malfoy's 11, Harry said. Ron considered this. "Yeah, no, you're right, it's learned, isn't it?" "Like flinching at a name," Harry said. Ron was quiet for a moment and then made a face that acknowledged the point with more grace than a lot of adults managed. Outside, England had finished and Scotland had begun, the landscape bigger and wilder, the hills dark with heather and the sky pressing down in that particular northern way, heavy and interesting. Harry watched it and felt the steady background hum of something large approaching. "Change into your robes," Hermione said practically. "We'll arrive within the hour." Harry changed. He noticed that his uniform fit better than expected. He'd had it fitted at Madame Malkin's, and she'd given him a look when the measuring tape reported results that surprised her but had said nothing. He was lean and not particularly large for 11, but there was a quality to the way he held himself now since September that was difficult to categorize. Not swagger. Stillness, maybe. The relaxed readiness of something that had no reason to brace because bracing implied expecting to be hit. He'd stopped expecting to be hit a long time ago. Hogsmeade Station arrived in rain and darkness, which Harry found appropriate in a dramatic sort of way. Platform was chaos, hundreds of students pouring off a train into the Scottish night, a roar of voices, and then out of the noise came a voice that cut through all of it without apparent effort. Furs years over here, Hagrid. Harry felt a genuine warmth at the sight of him, vast and lamplit in the darkness, waving a lantern above the crowd. He pushed toward him with Ron and Hermione in tow. Harry, Hagrid's face split into a grin. All right, good, Harry said. Train was excellent. They filed onto boats, 4 to a boat, pushed off from the shore, and then the castle appeared. Harry had read descriptions of Hogwarts. He'd looked at the single small photograph in one of his books, black and white, tiny, unhelpful. None of it had prepared him for the actual scale of the thing rising out of the dark above the water. Towers and battlements and hundreds of lit windows reflected in the lake below, so that it seemed like there were 2 castles, one reaching up and one reaching down into the depths. His spider sense went briefly extraordinary. The magical signature of the place was enormous, centuries deep, layered like geological strata, and it pressed against his awareness with the weight of something alive. Not dangerous. Old, the difference mattered. Blimey, Ron breathed beside him. Hermione said nothing, which from her seemed to indicate genuine speechlessness. Harry looked at the castle and thought, yes. The entrance hall was taken care of by a stern woman in emerald robes who introduced herself as Professor McGonagall with the air of someone who has given this speech many times and considers it important to maintain its quality regardless. She had sharp eyes and a precise mouth, and her magical signature was the cleanest, most controlled thing Harry had felt since the wand shop, disciplined, like a river in a defined channel rather than spreading water. She told them they'd be sorted by a method she declined to specify, and then left them in the entrance hall to wait. The ghost appeared shortly after, a pearlescent, slightly sad one that introduced itself as nearly headless Nick, and Harry asked it 2 questions about the castle's history that he'd had no source for, and it answered them with obvious pleasure at being asked. When McGonagall returned, he had confirmed 3 architectural details he'd been uncertain about and established that the castle's foundations predated even the known founding records by at least 50 years, which suggested the site had been magically significant long before the school. He filed this away. It might matter for something. The Great Hall opened around them like a geographical fact, and Harry looked up at the bewitched ceiling, the storm moving in realistic miniature above them, lightning threading between clouds, and felt the magic of it interact with his awareness pleasantly, like looking at something very beautiful that was also structurally impressive. He looked at the 4 long tables, the hundreds of faces turning toward the first years, the 1,000 candles. He found the staff table and ran his eyes along it with the same methodical attention he gave everything. McGonagall, who he knew. A very large, very pale man with the specific look of someone who was containing themselves effortfully. A man with a purple turban whose magical signature was, Harry's attention snagged on it and held wrong. Not wrong in the sense of weak or malformed, wrong in the sense of double. 2 signatures in one location, one over the other, misaligned like 2 photographs taken of the same place from slightly different angles. He was still parsing that when his gaze moved to the next person. Dark robes, black eyes. The hooked nose and specific stillness of someone who never forgot anything and had no interest in pretending otherwise. The magical signature was controlled the way McGonagall's was, but where hers was a clean river, this was more like contained pressure, the magic of someone who had more of it than they showed. The black eyes found him at exactly the same moment Harry found them. There was a beat of mutual evaluative attention. Then Snape looked away, with a precision that managed to be colder than not looking at all. Harry tucked the man into the file labeled complicated and turned his attention to the stool at the front of the hall, where McGonagall had placed a battered, ancient hat. The hat opened a tear near its brim and sang. Harry listened to the song with genuine interest. It was a history and a philosophy compressed into verse, the 4 founders and their values, the purpose of the sorting. He thought about each house as it was described. Gryffindor's bravery, Ravenclaw's wit, Hufflepuff's loyalty, Slytherin's ambition. The sorting hat presented them as distinct, as if a person was primarily one thing, which Harry found mildly questionable but acknowledged as a useful organizational principle. Names were called. Students went up. The hat announced its decisions, sometimes slowly, sometimes almost immediately. Hermione, when her name was called, strode up with the brisk confidence of someone who has already accepted an outcome and sat down, and the hat came down over her eyes, and within 30 seconds said Gryffindor in a carrying voice, and the left side table erupted. She found a seat and immediately looked like she'd always been there. Ron went, Gryffindor, slightly longer deliberation, Ron's face going from anxious to deeply relieved when the word was called. Draco Malfoy went before Harry. The hat barely touched his head before announcing Slytherin, and Draco walked to the right side table with his composure reassembled, and his expression carefully neutral. Harry caught the specific quality of his eyes before he turned away, not triumph, something more complicated than that. Potter Harry. The hall went quiet in a way that was different from the quiet for other names. Harry walked to the stool with his hands loose at his sides and sat down, and McGonagall placed the hat on his head and it dropped over his eyes and the world went dim. Then the hat spoke. But not aloud. Inside his head, a voice like old paper and something else underneath, the ghost of many voices collapsed into one. "Oh," the hat said, and then after a pause that felt longer than it was, "Oh, this is new." "I've been told that before," Harry said inside his head. "Two cores," the hat said with an almost academic fascination. "I have sorted 87 years of students and I have never the magical core and something else, something woven in. It's not, this isn't." "Can you still sort me?" Harry asked. The hat collected itself. Yes, I can still sort you. Let me." It was quiet for a moment, and Harry had the strange sensation of being read, not the way a face is read but deeply, the hat moving through him with something like careful fingers. "Bravery, yes, but that's not the whole of it. There's a kind of courage here that's more than instinct. It's considered, you've thought about it, you chose to be unafraid, it wasn't given to you. And the mind is exceptional. Ravenclaw would be delighted and Slytherin would argue for you. The ambition isn't obvious, but it's there, the desire to understand, to be more than defined." "Which one?" Harry asked. "If I'm honest," the hat said, "you don't fit cleanly into any of them, which is the most interesting result I've produced in quite some time. But the question isn't where you fit. The question is where you do the most." Harry thought about the great hall full of candles, about Hermione already looking like she belonged at the left table, about Ron's relieved face, about the castle's old and layered magic pressing against his awareness. He thought about bravery as a considered choice rather than an instinct. He thought about what it meant to walk into something deliberately with your eyes open. "Gryffindor," Harry said. The hat paused with the impression of a smile. "You know, most students don't tell me, they let me decide." "I just did decide," Harry said. "You asked which would do the most good, I'm telling you." "Yes," the hat said, "you are, aren't you?" Then it raised its voice for the hall, "Gryffindor." The applause was instantaneous and enormous, the left table surging to its feet, the noise cresting against the bewitched ceiling, and above it all Harry could hear faintly the one voice that was simply not shouting with everyone else. He pulled the hat off and handed it back to McGonagall, who was looking at him with an expression he hadn't seen on an adult's face before. Not quite surprise, more like recognition. He walked to the Gryffindor table and found a seat beside Ron, who was grinning with the openness of someone who hadn't quite believed until now that the evening would go this well. "How long was that?" Harry asked. 4 minutes, Ron said. "Longest sort of the night by a lot." Hermione was 30 seconds. 32, Hermione corrected from 2 seats down without looking up from the program of school terms she'd already acquired from somewhere. Harry looked at the staff table. Snape was watching him, that precise, containing gaze with an expression that gave away precisely nothing. Harry met the look without any particular reaction, and after a moment Snape looked away again. The man in the turban, Professor Quirrell, someone told him, was watching too, but Harry's attention snagged again on that double signature, the misaligned overlay of 2 magical presences. Quirrell's eyes slid away from Harry's with a quick, involuntary discomfort. "Interesting." Dumbledore stood, beaming, and made announcements that Harry catalogued: the Forbidden Forest, the 3rd-floor corridor, with the attentiveness of someone noting which doors he was being told not to open. Then food appeared, and the conversation at the table consumed everything else. Gryffindor Tower was reached by an unreasonable number of stairs, and a portrait of a large woman in a pink dress who required a password. And Harry made note of both the route and the alternative routes he identified along the way by the castle's layout. The magical map of the place was building itself in his awareness the way all environments did now. His spider sense logging distances and textures and structural weights, filing the information somewhere useful. The common room was warm and red and chaotic with first-year unpacking energy. Harry took a corner armchair and observed while people settled around him, names attaching to faces, the social geometry of who knew who from before and who was new. Fred and George Weasley appeared from the upper stairs, already plotting something involving one of the prefects. Percy Weasley materialized to tell them to stop, and was ignored with the practiced efficiency of siblings. He slept that night in his own bed, a real one with curtains and a real mattress, and woke at 5 in the morning as he always did now, because his body had decided that sleeping past 5 was wasteful, and went up to the empty roof of the tallest tower he could find an access to. Dawn came in gold over the Scottish hills, and he did his training on the castle ramparts in the cold quiet because old habits were worth keeping. September, as it turned out, contained quite a lot of Snape. Potions was in the dungeons on Thursday mornings, and Harry descended the stairs with Ron on one side and Hermione already reading ahead on the other. And the dungeons were cold and damp and smelled of things he couldn't quite name, and the classroom was full of preserved creatures in glass jars and the low, chemical smell of ingredients. Snape entered without preamble, the room going quiet with a speed that suggested everyone had been pre-briefed by older siblings. He moved to the front with a quality Harry found genuinely difficult to classify, not theatrical the way some powerful people were theatrical, not aggressive the way others used entry. It was more like gravity. He occupied the front of the room and the room reorganized itself around him without being asked. He looked at the register. His eyes stopped briefly on Harry's name. Potter, he said, looking up. The black gaze found Harry immediately. Our new celebrity. Harry looked back with the same attentive directness he gave everyone. Professor Snape. Something moved in Snape's expression, too quick to classify. He moved on. I won't waste time on introductions to a subject you should already respect. What I expect is precision, patience, and the intellectual honesty to accept that talent in other areas. A pause that was almost inaudible but wasn't, does not automatically translate here. Potion making is its own discipline. Let's see what you actually know. He began asking questions through the class with the efficiency of someone stress testing a structure, finding the weak points methodically. Hermione's hand went up for most of them. When Harry's hand went up for the question about monkshood, Snape looked at it with the specific expression of someone who had expected it not to be there. Potter. Aconite, Harry said. Same plant, sometimes called wolfsbane. The tuber concentrates the toxin differently than the leaves, which is relevant for preparation because you have to account for uneven alkaloid distribution, or the potion's potency will vary. He paused. I read ahead. Obviously, Snape said, with a flatness that wasn't quite dismissive because the answer had been correct and specific and he was too honest to pretend otherwise. He moved on to the next question. In the practical that followed, a simple preparation exercise, Harry worked with the clean, methodical focus he brought to everything. His hands were precise. The spider-enhanced dexterity was something he'd tested across several months of regular activity, and fine motor control was one of its more quietly useful applications. His knife work on the ingredients was exact in a way that drew Snape's eye twice without comment. At the end of class, when Harry's potion had the correct color and the correct consistency, Snape looked at it for a moment, said nothing, moved on. Ron leaned over and whispered, he didn't take any points. No, Harry agreed. He took 4 from Neville, Ron said with the low outrage of a new but committed loyalty. He'd been watching Neville Longbottom's escalating anxiety all lesson and had twice helped him salvage things at his own station. For melting the cauldron. The cauldron issue was a heat problem, not a skill problem, Harry said. Neville's hands shake when Snape's watching him. He needs to find a way to not feel watched. How do you do that? Ron asked. Harry considered. I try to make the watching feel like information instead of judgment, like the person watching is telling you something about them, not deciding something about you. Ron thought about this. That's either very wise or completely mad. Often both, Harry said. Hermione, from Harry's other side, did not look up from her notes, but her quill paused for just a moment and then wrote something extra that she hadn't said out loud. Flying was on the grounds, which Harry had been looking forward to with the particular quality of looking forward to something you suspect you'll be good at. Not arrogance, just the alignment of instinct with opportunity. Madame Hooch had the sharp eyes and the no-nonsense manner of someone who loved the sport underneath the instruction. She walked them through mounting, through the command, and Harry put his hand over the broom and set up with exactly the confidence the instructor's whole approach implied was the correct state of mind. And the broom slapped into his palm before the word was fully out of his mouth. He saw Ron notice. Ron's face did something that wasn't quite jealousy, closer to the open, uncomplicated wonder of someone watching something purely impressive without needing to own it. That was one of the things Harry was coming to appreciate about Ron. He liked flying even more than he'd expected. The feel of it, the wind, the speed, the three-dimensional freedom, interacted with everything the spider side of him liked about moving through space. He went up and the whole of Scotland opened beneath him and he banked left and felt the broom respond to intention the way the webs responded, and he thought, yes, this is the shape of it. He didn't show off. He found the correct altitude, the correct pace, matched the instruction with the precision Madame Hooch wanted from the class. But when Draco Malfoy, who had been watching Harry with the cold attention of someone looking for a point of entry, decided to seize on Neville's remembrall, Neville having gone over and Madame Hooch having taken him to the hospital wing in a rush of concern, and dangle it at height as a provocation, Harry didn't deliberate. He just went up. Vertical, immediate, the broom angling sharply because he told it to with his whole body and it responded. From the ground the class made a noise. He came level with Draco at speed, pulled up to a stop 3 feet from him with a control that shouldn't have been possible on a school broom and looked at him. Draco's face was doing something interesting. He'd expected a chase. He'd expected Harry to be fast but erratic, a first year on a school broom showing off manageable. What he got instead was Harry Potter, completely still in the air 10 feet off the ground, looking at him with calm, clear attention and one hand open. "Give it back," Harry said, not loud, not aggressive, just that same direct, clear voice. Draco looked at the remembrall, looked at Harry. "Why should I?" "Because Neville didn't do anything to you," Harry said. "And because the other reason you're doing it is to see what I'll do and I've already done it. So you've got your answer, give it back." A long moment. The class below was very quiet. Harry could feel the weight of their attention from up here, a faint vibration in the air, the specific held breath of a crowd watching something that could go several ways. Draco dropped the remembrall. Harry's hand moved. One clean, fast motion, he didn't look down, just dropped his arm below the broom's edge and caught the remembrall one-handed about 4 feet below where Draco had released it, by feel and by the spider sense that had tracked it from the moment it left Draco's fingers. He looked back up at Draco. There was a moment brief exposed where Draco's performance dropped. What was underneath was complicated and not entirely hostile. He looked at Harry the way Harry had begun to notice he kept looking at Harry, like a problem he'd assumed would be simple that kept revealing new dimensions. Harry flew back down, landed cleanly. Madame Hooch's voice said from somewhere to his left with a feeling that was equal parts horrified and deeply impressed. "Potter, I should," a pause. "That was, do not do that again without instruction. I should." "It won't happen again," Harry said. "Draco won't need to test it again." He looked at Madame Hooch, who had arrived back at the edge of the group. Her sharp eyes held his for a moment. Then she looked up at the sky where Draco was now descending with somewhat less dignity than he did going up. "Go inside," she said to the class. "All of you, except," she stopped. "Actually, Potter, don't go far." He stood to one side while the class filed in and Draco passed him and didn't say anything but looked at him once with that complicated expression. Harry nodded at him, which seemed to surprise him enough that he kept walking. Professor McGonagall appeared before Harry had been waiting 3 minutes, striding across the grass with her robes sweeping and her expression set. That, she said, stopping in front of him, was either breathtaking or deeply irresponsible, and I cannot decide which. "Both," Harry offered. "I've heard that about me." Her mouth did something it clearly had an opinion about but was choosing not to express. "You can fly," she said. "You can really fly." "I've been doing it for about 20 minutes, Harry said honestly. She looked at him for a long, evaluating moment. "Come with me," she said. "I need to speak with Oliver Wood. He made the Gryffindor Quidditch team as seeker before the end of September," which Ron greeted with an explosion of delight that knocked his chess pieces off the board and caused 4 other Gryffindors to come over and find out what was happening. Harry found he was pleased, genuinely, openly pleased, not at the prestige of it, but because the flying had been brilliant, and now he'd get to do it regularly and properly. Youngest seeker in a century, Hermione informed the common room, which had gathered with the instinct of a social organism detecting significant news. Possibly the youngest since the century before that, depending on how you read the records, which are inconsistent at best. "How do you even know that?" Ron asked. "I read the Hogwarts, a history entry on Quidditch records," Hermione said. "There's a whole section." "There's a whole section," Ron repeated, to nobody in particular. Harry was looking at the Quidditch through the Ages book he'd borrowed from the library, reading about the seeker position with the same thorough attention he gave anything new. He mapped it against what he already understood about his own aerial sense, about how his spider awareness tracked moving objects, about the way the remembrall had fallen, and he'd caught it by pure, instinctive feel. The snitch moved fast and was small and designed to evade. It was essentially the most complex version of a thing moving through space that he could be asked to track. He was looking forward to it in the specific way he looked forward to things that would be genuinely difficult. Easy things were fine. Difficult things were interesting. He stayed up reading until midnight, long after the common room had emptied, sitting cross-legged in the corner chair with the fire burning down to embers, and the castle settling into its nighttime sounds, which he was learning to read the same way he'd learned to read the sounds of Privet Drive. He heard at around 11:30 the distant sound of something large moving in the castle corridors below with an awkward, irregular gait. He held very still. Let his spider sense reach out, not a person, something bigger, something that moved with the specific weight of something not accustomed to enclosed spaces. He went to the window, looked out, the grounds were quiet. He sat back down. Something is in the castle that shouldn't be, he thought. Not tonight's problem, but something to know. He filed it. Return to his book, read 3 more chapters. The fire burned down. Outside, Hogwarts held its ancient, enormous quiet, and somewhere in its depths, in a corridor with a third-floor restriction, something waited that was connected to a stone and a dead man's desire for immortality and a wizard who was not quite gone. Harry turned a page. He didn't know about any of that yet. But he had an instinct already that the double magical signature in the turban was important, that the third-floor corridor was worth understanding. That the castle had more structure to it than the class schedule implied. He was building the picture. He'd been building pictures since September, since the bite, since the first time he'd pressed his hand to a wall and felt the world reorganize itself around what he was becoming. He put down the book, looked at the dying fire. He thought about the hat's voice in his head, where you do the most good. He thought about choosing rather than being sorted. Then he went to bed and slept well and woke at 5 and went up to the ramparts in the cold Scottish morning to train. The castle watched him from its many windows with the patient, ancient attention of something that had seen everything and was not yet sure what this particular thing would mean. Chapter 3. The Things That Watch. October arrived in Hogwarts the way it arrives in Scotland, not gradually but all at once, as if the weather had been waiting for a signal and someone finally gave it. The trees on the grounds turned overnight and the lake went the color of hammered pewter and the wind off the mountains had teeth in it that it hadn't had in September. Harry liked it. He'd always preferred cold to heat. Cold was cleaner, more honest about what it was. He was doing his morning training on the ramparts in the first week of October when he saw the owls coming. Not Hedwig, a mass of them, 30 or 40, arrowing in from the south in loose formation with packages and letters, the morning post arriving with its usual organized chaos. He watched them bank and descend toward the great hall windows and felt the castle stir around him the way it did every morning at this time, a slight warming in its ambient magic as the day began in earnest. He did another set on the rampart wall, hands only, his feet hooked under the stone crenellation above him, 30 inverted press-ups in the cold gray air with Scotland dropping away below and the wind making reasonable objections, and then went inside to shower and get to breakfast before the hall got loud. He was working through Eggs and the Prophet, which he'd started buying for the information density rather than because he trusted it, in the same way you might read an opponent's notes. When the post owls swept in, and Ron's mother's owl arrived with a package that turned out to contain fudge and a letter, and Ron's face went through a sequence of emotions that told a whole story about the Weasley family dynamic without anyone saying a word. Harry noticed but didn't comment. He'd learned that some people needed to process things without being observed, and Ron was one of them. He had a kind of pride that was easily bruised, not through weakness but through caring too much, and Harry respected it. He was reading about a ministry initiative to track unregistered animagi, interesting from a theoretical standpoint, less interesting from a practical one when he felt it. The spider sense didn't spike, nothing as urgent as that, but it sharpened in the background way that meant attention required. He looked up without obvious movement. Snape was watching him from the staff table. Not the cold evaluation of the first day, not the deliberate pressure-applying gaze he used in class. Something more intent, more private. The black eyes moved away when Harry looked up, but not quite fast enough. There was a fraction of a second's visible effort in the withdrawal, the sense of someone who had been doing something they'd prefer not to acknowledge. Harry turned a page of the Prophet. He thought, Snape knows something. The thought wasn't fear or alarm. It was the same classification feeling he got from most things, the first step in understanding being to admit there was something to understand. Snape was watching him with the focused attention of someone working on a problem. What the problem was and whose problem it was remained unclear. Harry added it to the active list and went back to breakfast. Charms was the best class, which Harry hadn't predicted but had come to accept by the third week. Professor Flitwick was a small man with a large voice and the specific joy of someone who had spent 50 years finding a subject genuinely delightful and hadn't run out of reasons yet. His magical signature was precise and layered, technique over technique, years of refinement stacked like lacquer, and his classes moved at the pace of someone who knew exactly how long each idea needed to breathe. Harry took to spellwork the way he took to flying, not with the automatic instinct of someone naturally gifted, but with the specific facility of someone whose learning process had been accelerated by a change he didn't fully understand. Spells clicked faster for him than they should, which Flitwick had noticed after the second class and responded to by quietly giving Harry more complex variations to practice while the rest caught up. It's not that you're more naturally talented, Hermione told him one evening in the library, in the tone of someone presenting a finding rather than making a judgment. I've been watching. It's that you process the feedback faster. When a spell doesn't work, you correct in real time instead of stopping and rethinking. Like kinesthetic learning, Harry said. Yes, but faster than normal kinesthetic learning. She paused. Her quill tapped her parchment twice. It's interesting. You can just ask, Harry said. She looked at him. She'd been getting better at direct eye contact over the past few weeks, had been, he suspected, practicing it with the same intentionality she brought to everything else. Ask what? Why I learn things the way I do. He looked at her steadily. I don't mind explaining, I just haven't found the right moment. She looked at him for a long moment, weighing something. Not here, she said finally. There are too many people. Common room tonight, Harry said. Late, after 11 when it empties. She nodded and looked back at her parchment, and the quill moved again, and Harry had the impression of someone who had just filed something important under pending. He went back to his charms reading, and felt the familiar dual hum of his two cores settling comfortably alongside each other the way they'd learned to do over the past year. The magic felt different when he cast spells than it presumably felt for other people. He could feel it moving through both the wand channel and the other thing, that spiderworm core in his chest. And occasionally when a spell was particularly well executed, the two would briefly harmonize and the result would be cleaner and sharper than it had any right to be. He hadn't told Flitwick about that. He hadn't told anyone about that. Tonight, he thought, he'd tell Hermione tonight, and Ron if Ron was up. Ron would be up. Ron had the insomnia of someone whose brain didn't stop talking. He hadn't expected the troll. In hindsight, there were signs he should have read more carefully. The heightened edge in his spider sense through the later afternoon, the way the castle's ambient magic had a slightly discordant note to it by dinner, like a string instrument a quarter tone flat. He'd noticed both things and filed them as general unease, source unclear. He should have dug further. The Halloween feast was extraordinary by any standard, mountains of food materializing with the cheerful abundance of a castle that was never going to be stingy at a celebration. And Harry was eating and listening to Ron's enthusiastic historical commentary on wizard Halloween traditions when the doors opened and Professor Quirrell fell through them. Harry's spider sense spiked. Not the slow, directional awareness of the morning, the sharp, instinctive something is wrong right now that he'd learned in 11 months to trust completely. He put down his fork and was looking at the doors before Quirrell had finished his first syllable. Troll, Quirrell gasped, grabbing the doors for support. In the dungeons, thought you should know. He fainted with the theatrical completeness of someone who had used their last reserve. The hall exploded. Harry stood. He felt the double magical signature moving with Quirrell's slumped form as it was carried to the side, still misaligned, still layered, still wrong in a way that nagged at him, but he didn't have time to focus on it because the prefects were trying to move 500 students and it was going with the organized chaos of a fire drill that nobody had practiced. He caught Ron's arm as they were pulled into the corridor stream. Hermione, he said. Ron's face changed. She wasn't at the feast, he said. She went to the bathroom. She was upset because he stopped. Harry had already turned. He was moving against the flow of students, which was complicated but navigable. He angled his body sideways and moved through the gaps with the specific spatial intelligence he'd been developing for a year, reading the crowd as a physical system and finding its seams. Harry, Ron's voice behind him, and then Ron pushing through after him. Harry glanced back and felt a quick, uncomplicated warmth. Ron hadn't hesitated. Good. He tracked the castle's layout from the mental map he'd been building since arrival, turned left at the second staircase instead of following the flow, went down a level, came out in the ground floor corridor. His magical awareness was reaching ahead of him and finding, yes, something large and blunt and moving, a magical signature that was barely there, the crude and simple magic of a creature that existed rather than practiced. And something smaller behind a door to the left. He moved faster. His feet were silent. He'd always been able to move quietly, and the spider senses had refined this into something close to art. He came around the corner with Ron slightly behind him, breathing hard, and the troll was in the girls' bathroom corridor, 12 feet tall and swinging a club with the cheerful obliviousness of something that had never been told the word consequence. The bathroom door was to its left, closed. Harry could feel through the door a small and terrified magical signature that had gone very still the way prey animals go still. Hermione, Ron said, breathless. Get her attention, Harry said. I'll deal with the troll. Yule, Ron looked at the troll. It had turned at the sound of voices and was regarding them with its tiny eyes and its large, damp, uncomplicated appetite. Harry was already moving. He didn't go at it straight on. That was the obvious approach, and the obvious approach was for people who hadn't spent 11 months learning how to move through three-dimensional space as a problem to be solved. He went left fast, drawing its attention with his movement, and the troll swung its club at where he'd been and the corridor shook with the impact. He was already 6 feet up the wall. The troll looked up. In the troll's limited experience, things did not go up walls. Harry hung there for exactly the fraction of a second he needed, the spider sense mapping the troll's movement pattern, the weight of its club arm, the specific awkward pivot of its neck, and then he pushed off and landed on the troll's back and held on. The troll went berserk. It was like riding something between a horse and an earthquake. Harry kept his grip with both hands and both feet, the adhesion working at full strength, and pressed flat against the troll's neck and shoulders while it spun and batted at itself and bellowed with a sound like a falling building. The club went into the wall twice and sent chunks of stone skittering across the floor. Harry rode it with the concentrated focus of someone who had decided this was simply a problem of angles and timing. He had his wand. "Ron," he called, completely level because there was no point in adding panic to a panicking situation. The club's Wingardium Leviosa. Ron, to his enormous credit, did not spend time on the question of how is he doing that. He pulled his wand, he remembered the wrist movement Flitwick had drilled into them, he concentrated. The troll's club ripped out of its hand. The troll's reaction to losing its club involved a lot of sound and a lot of spinning. But it was also functionally a distraction. Harry pulled himself up and crouched on the thing's shoulders and pointed his wand at the troll's nose, which was the most sensitive thing on its face, and said stupefy with the full, clear intention that made the difference between a stunner that slowed something and a stunner that stopped it. The troll took it in the face and sat down very heavily. The corridor went quiet. Harry rode the troll down and stepped off as it settled and stood for a moment breathing normally, checking himself. No, nothing hurt. He'd have known, dust on his robes, a graze on his left palm where he'd pressed against the rough stone wall, nothing significant. He looked at his left hand with mild interest. The graze was already closing. It did that. The bathroom door opened. Hermione stood in it with wide eyes and the expression of someone who has processed something extraordinary and is still catching up to their own reaction. She looked at Harry, looked at the troll, looked at Harry, then at Ron. "You came to find me," she said. "Course we did," Ron said, which came out rougher than he intended because his voice was doing the thing it did when he was feeling something strongly and didn't know the protocol for it. "Someone had to, yeah." Hermione looked back at Harry. "You climbed the troll." "It was the fastest approach," Harry said. "You climbed the troll," she repeated. "Wingardium Leviosa on the club was your idea, essentially," Harry said, and that made something in her expression rearrange itself very quickly. "You drilled the wrist movement in the common room last Tuesday." Ron was ready because you'd already made him practice. Ron made a sound that might have been protest at being described as having practiced anything. They'd argued about the wrist movement for 20 minutes, but Hermione's expression was doing something complicated and honest and real. She looked at them both. "Thank you," she said, which for Hermione Harry was learning was a larger thing than it sounded. The teachers arrived, as teachers do immediately after the dramatic portion is over. McGonagall came first with Snape and Quirrell close behind. McGonagall's face cycled from relief at seeing them alive to the specific controlled expression of someone who needs to maintain an institutional position on unauthorized student troll fighting. Snape was looking at Harry. Harry was looking at Snape. And specifically at Snape's leg, which he'd moved slightly behind him but not quite fast enough. Harry's eyes had already registered the tear in the robe, the darkness of a bruise or something worse along the shin, and his magical awareness had already clocked the faint trace of something large and magical that wasn't Snape's own signature. He was on the third floor, Harry thought with complete calm. What was he doing on the third floor? He filed it. McGonagall was saying something about irresponsibility, and also bravery with the exhausted tone of someone who knows both are true and doesn't want to have to hold them simultaneously. She gave Gryffindor 20 points each for the troll. She was visibly arguing with herself about whether it should be more and choosing not to give her instincts this particular victory. And then Hermione said, very clearly and with the quality of someone choosing their words intentionally, that she'd been looking for the troll herself because she'd read about them, which Harry recognized as a sacrifice of her own comfort on behalf of the three of them, and he appreciated it enough to make a quiet note of it. On the way back up to the common room, with Quirrell fluttering some distance ahead and McGonagall's robes sweeping around the corner above them, Harry said quietly to Hermione, "He was on the third floor." She glanced at him. "Snape, he has a wound on his leg. Something on the third floor hurt him." He kept his voice low and easy, not urgent. "Someone let that troll in tonight. I don't know if it was him or if he was investigating, but either way, the third floor corridor," Hermione said. Her voice had gone into the precise, rapid processing mode he'd learned to recognize as her thinking at full speed. Something's being kept there. The headmaster's announcement at the start of term was unusually specific. Anyone who doesn't want to suffer a very painful death is the phrasing he used, which is theatrical but also informative, Harry agreed. Whatever's there is lethal. Whatever's lethal that you keep in a school probably has a very specific protective purpose. He paused. Gringotts was broken into over the summer. I read it in the Prophet archives. Hermione stopped walking. Ron almost walked into her. She looked at Harry with the expression she got when a significant piece of information had just connected to something she already had. The vault that was broken into was reported empty by the Ministry. But Hagrid went to Gringotts with you on your first day. He took something from a vault, Harry said. He was very deliberate about not telling me what it was. So something from Gringotts is being kept at Hogwarts, Hermione said. Something valuable enough to warrant a guarded room and theatrical warnings. And someone wants it, Harry said. The troll was a distraction. Someone let it in while the teachers were occupied. Snape, Ron said, who had been following this with his mouth slightly open and had now arrived at an expression of grim determination. It has to be Snape. Maybe, Harry said, but Quirrell was the one who told us about the troll. Ron frowned. He warned us about it. He did, Harry agreed. He also fainted immediately after. He left it there. He could see Ron turning the thought over, could see Hermione adding it to whatever structure she was building in her head, and he didn't push it further because he'd learned that presenting things clearly and then giving people space to arrive at their own conclusions was more valuable than presenting conclusions. He also wasn't certain. Not yet. But the double signature in the turban had been bothering him since the first night in the Great Hall, and tonight it had been the sharpest he'd felt it. A spike of something cold and alien underneath Quirrell's warm, frightened magic during that frantic moment in the doorway. Like something beneath the surface coming briefly close to the top. He needed more information. He was good at getting information. He didn't say any of that either. He went to bed. He processed. He slept. Late October became November, and the Quidditch season opened. Harry on a proper broomstick, a Nimbus 2000, which Oliver Wood had sourced with the reverent energy of someone handling sacred objects, was a different proposition from Harry on a school broom. The Nimbus responded to thought almost before it was fully formed, the slightest shift in weight or intention translating immediately into movement, and the first time Harry took it to full speed across the pitch, he had to consciously stop himself from making noises of pure delight because Oliver was watching from the ground with a clipboard and an expression of intense professionalism. He made the noises internally. That was fine. The first match was Gryffindor versus Slytherin, on a cold, gray November morning with the stands full and colored scarves whipping in the wind. Harry noticed Snape in the referee's seat, Snape, not Madam Hooch, which was unusual, and noted it without significant reaction. Snape could referee. It was a data point. The crowd was vast and loud, and Harry's spider sense settled into the specific mode it had for large groups, a broad, diffuse awareness rather than targeted, like the difference between peripheral vision and focus. He didn't find crowds overwhelming the way he imagined he might have before September. The noise was just another vibration system. He read it the way he read everything else. He found the snitch 7 minutes in. Not because of any spectacular display of seeking, it was just there, a small golden glint hovering 40 feet above the Slytherin goal posts, barely moving. He saw it because his visual acuity was now simply better than it used to be, and because his spider sense had clocked a moving object smaller than expected at that altitude before his eyes consciously focused. He angled toward it without urgency, keeping his line of approach casual, using the flight path to appear as if he were simply repositioning. The Slytherin seeker noticed him at the same moment he was 3 seconds from the snitch. It became a race that wasn't really a race. His Nimbus was faster and he had the angle, and the Slytherin seeker, to his credit, flew hard and well, but Harry's hand closed around the snitch with a clean, decisive snap that he felt all the way to his shoulder, and he pulled up and opened his fist to show the crowd, and the stands went extraordinary. But then his broom lurched. Not a wind gust, not turbulence. His spider sense fired hard and specific. Something wrong with the broom, external interference, magical origin. He gripped the Nimbus with his legs and hands as it began to buck in a way no broom ever bucked naturally, a sharp, rhythmic jerking that was unmistakably directed. Someone was doing this. He didn't panic, he stabilized. His spider-enhanced grip was not something a jinx built for an ordinary student had accounted for, and he held on with the calm certainty of someone who had ridden a 12-foot troll in a corridor and found that experience instructive. He scanned the stands. His magical awareness reached out and found it almost immediately, a thread of directed magic coming from the stands from the staff area, tight and focused. He tracked it. Snape. Staring at him, unblinking, lips moving. But also from somewhere else in the stands, another thread of magic, brighter and less focused, crossing Snape's, intersecting it. Harry's broom steadied beneath him as if the two spells had cancelled each other. He turned his head. Hermione was in the stands, and she was breathing hard, and there was a small patch of smoke at the hem of Quirrell's robes where she'd apparently knocked a candle holder in the process of doing something else, and Quirrell was patting at it with his hat in agitation and looking less than composed. Harry looked at Hermione. She looked back. He could see her processing something that didn't quite match her model of who was responsible for what. He looked back at Snape. The broom was completely steady now. He descended, landed, the crowd still roaring. Oliver Wood appeared and grabbed him by the shoulders and said something enthusiastic that Harry processed with the distant politeness of someone whose attention was elsewhere. Snape was watching him again, different from before, calculating. The black eyes moved from Harry to Quirrell's direction and then back. So he was counter-jinxing, Harry thought, not jinxing, countering. He thought about the third-floor corridor, the wound on Snape's leg. The file labeled complicated expanded significantly. The evening after the match, Harry did what he'd been considering for 3 weeks. He went to the third floor. He went alone at 1 in the morning in the castle's deepest quiet. He moved through the corridors with the light-footed silence that his body now produced automatically. No shoes that needed to be whispered into quiet, just the natural hush of someone who had learned to step correctly. He'd found 2 of the castle's servant passages in his morning explorations, narrow routes behind walls, cold and dusty and navigationally efficient. He used them now. The third-floor corridor was exactly where the castle's map said it would be, and the door at the end was locked, and Harry put his hand against the door and felt the magical signature through the wood. Something very large, very magically saturated. And behind that, layered under it, the sense of more, a complexity he couldn't read at this distance, multiple magical systems in sequence. He was not going in. Not tonight. He had no plan, no preparation, and walking through a door unprepared was stupid, and he tried not to be stupid about things that mattered. He was here to read the exterior, to understand the scale, to find out what his awareness could tell him from the safe side of the door. He crouched by the keyhole. The warmth from the other side was extraordinary. Whatever magical creature was in there was enormous, not just physically, the magical mass of it pressed against the door like heat from a furnace. And behind it, the layered complexity of what he was increasingly certain were protective enchantments. Multiple, overlapping, designed by people who knew what they were doing. So a very powerful something guarding a very valuable something. The Gringotts Vault, something small enough to carry, important enough to move to the most secure magical building in Britain. He filed everything he'd sensed and went back through the passage the way he'd come, and emerged in the 7th-floor corridor and climbed back to Gryffindor Tower and sat in the corner chair in the dark, empty common room. He thought about Quirrell, the double signature, the something cold and alien underneath. He thought about Snape on the 3rd floor. He thought about what it meant that someone was clearly trying to get to whatever was behind that door and had been since at least the troll incident and probably before. He thought about the scar, about the magical residue in it, old, dark, dormant, about what Ollivander had said regarding the wand that had made it. He thought about a wizard who was not quite gone, not fear. He held the thought and checked himself for fear and found instead a cool, clear, wide-awake interest. Something was happening at Hogwarts, in the dark, behind the official version of the year, and it was related to him whether he went looking for it or not. He'd spent 11 months learning that the best response to a thing you hadn't chosen was to understand it fully before it understood you. He opened his eyes. The common room fire had burned to red coals. The castle was silent. He had the thought he always had when the picture was incomplete but growing, more information needed, get it quietly, tell the right people at the right time. He was doing it. He'd find out what he needed to know. He went to bed. November sharpened into December, and the castle took on the specific atmosphere of a place preparing for a long winter, fires burning higher, students moving through corridors faster, everyone's patience wearing at the edges from proximity and cold. The common room was more crowded than ever in the evenings, and Harry had taken to doing his reading on the less popular stairs behind the astronomy tower, where the wind was honest and the view of the grounds was excellent. He was there on a Thursday evening when he heard the footsteps. Not a teacher's. He knew the teacher's gates now, had catalogued them in the first month, could tell McGonagall's brisk efficiency from Flitwick's quick, light step from Snape's deliberate measuring pace. These steps were hesitant, slightly uneven, Neville, he thought before he saw him, and was right. Neville Longbottom appeared around the bend with his herbology textbook held to his chest like a shield and the expression of someone who has been looking for somewhere quiet and found someone in it. "Sorry," Neville said immediately. "I didn't know you were. I'll go." "Sit down," Harry said, gesturing at the step beside him. "It's a better reading spot than you'd think. The wind's from the east tonight. It won't hit this side." Neville sat with the uncertain gratitude of someone who hasn't been invited places enough for it to feel normal. He opened his herbology book. After a moment he closed it again. "Can I ask you something?" he said, staring at the horizon. "Yes. How do you not when Snape's watching you in class? When he stopped, tried again. My hands don't work properly when he's watching. I know what I'm doing and then he looks and I forget." He said it with the particular self-disgust of someone who has given this problem more thought than it deserved and arrived at the same ugly conclusion each time. Harry thought about this genuinely. He looked at the darkening grounds, at the lights in Hagrid's hut, at the lake going black at its center. The shaking is information, Harry said, about how much you care, not about how capable you are. Those aren't the same thing. Neville was quiet. Snape looks at you to find the shake, Harry continued, because it tells him something about you that gives him not power exactly, but a kind of control. So the question is how to not give him that information. But I can't just stop being nervous, Neville said with a helplessness that was honest and therefore not hopeless. No, Harry agreed, but you can change what the nervousness is about. Right now you're nervous about making a mistake while he's watching. What if you were nervous about something else? Something you actually needed to solve, the actual potion, the actual problem? Nervousness is just energy. It's already in you. It just needs a direction. Neville looked at him sideways. That's very easy to say. It is, Harry said. It takes practice, but it's true. He paused. Also, and I'm not suggesting you do this, but Snape watches me because I confuse him. He hasn't figured out what I am yet, and that bothers him more than anything I could do wrong. What do you mean what you are? Neville asked. Harry smiled. He looked back at the grounds. Something he doesn't have a category for, he said. Which is fine. I don't need him to have a category for me. Neville thought about this for long enough that the evening grew dark and the first stars appeared. Then he opened his herbology textbook again and read, and Harry read his charms theory, and they sat together in the reasonable companionship of two people who have found a quiet place and are being sensible about it. When they went inside, Harry heard Neville murmur something that was almost to himself. Something I don't have a category for, like he was trying the idea on. Harry didn't comment, but he thought, yes, that's the beginning of it. The Christmas holidays emptied Gryffindor Tower to a skeleton crew. Ron stayed, to Harry's genuine pleasure, and they spent the better part of 2 weeks playing chess and eating in a great hall that felt enormous and comfortable without 500 people in it. Harry beat Ron at chess on the 20th attempt, which Ron greeted with a profound respect that was somehow more satisfying than an easy win would have been. He got presents on Christmas morning for the first time in his memory. The Weasley jumper was green. Mrs. Weasley apparently had opinions about his coloring, and was the most straightforwardly kind object he'd ever been given. He wore it immediately. He was still wearing it at dinner. Ron, who had a maroon one and had mild feelings about maroon, found this disproportionately funny. There was also a package he didn't recognize, no card, a silvery fabric inside that seemed to be made of water. He held it up in the empty dormitory. His magical awareness ran over it and found something extraordinary, a deep, layered enchantment, ancient, of a sophistication that put it above almost anything else he'd handled. He thought of Ollivander's words about things with more than one history. Invisibility cloak. He put it on, he looked at where his legs should be, they weren't there, he took it off, put it back on, took it off again, thought about it. Who sent this, he didn't know, he had suspicions which he filed. What he did know was that this was an extraordinary object, freely given, and that it had uses he could already enumerate. He spent the Christmas holiday cataloging them, which mostly involved walking through the empty tower invisible and testing the cloak's range and the interaction between his spider sense and the invisibility. His spider sense still worked. Obviously, it was perception outward, not inward. He could feel the world perfectly clearly. The world just couldn't see him. He thought about that, thought about the third-floor corridor, thought about Quirrell and the double signature and the cold alien underneath. He thought after Christmas. I'll go back after Christmas. He folded the cloak carefully and put it at the bottom of his trunk and went back downstairs to lose at chess to Ron and eat mince pies by the fire, and was happy in a clean and specific way he hadn't been for long enough that he'd stopped expecting it. It was good. He held on to that. There was enough that was complicated. For now there was chess and fire and the solid, uncomplicated company of someone who asked nothing of him except honesty, and that was enough. Outside, the Scottish winter pressed against the windows. The castle settled around them. Somewhere below in the dungeon and in the dark, the double signature breathed in Quirrell's sleep and waited. Harry moved his knight and watched Ron's face fall. That's not fair, Ron said. It's completely fair, Harry said. You taught me that piece's range. I didn't think you'd. Ron threw his hands up. Right, again. Harry reset the board and the fire crackled and the night went deep around Hogwarts, and in the morning he'd go back to training and the mystery would still be there when he was ready for it. He was almost ready. Chapter 4, Threads and Secrets. January came in brutal and white, the kind of Scottish winter that made the castle feel like the only warm thing left in the world. Snow buried the grounds to the window ledges of the ground floor and the lake froze at its edges, leaving a dark central channel of open water where the giant squid occasionally surfaced and regarded the castle with its enormous, disinterested eye. Harry was in the library at 7 in the morning, which meant he had it almost entirely to himself, which was how he preferred it. He'd been working through the restricted section problem for 2 weeks. Not breaking in, he had the cloak and probably could. But there was a more elegant solution he'd been developing, which involved Flitwick, who he'd figured out would grant a restricted section note to any student who demonstrated genuine academic purpose and didn't phrase the request in a way that implied recreational curiosity. Harry had spent December writing a 6-page theoretical essay on layered enchantment systems, genuinely because it was interesting, and had given it to Flitwick with a note explaining the specific text he needed. Flitwick had read the essay, made a sound that was something between delight and surprise, and given him the note within 10 minutes. The books were less useful than he'd hoped and more useful than expected, which was usually how research went. What they confirmed was the structure of his theory. Objects of significant magical value were protected in sequences rather than single enchantments, each one designed to defeat a specific type of approach. The logic was the same as a combination lock. Any one mechanism defeated didn't breach the whole system. He was reading about the Mirror of Arist, which appeared in 2 of the texts as an example of objects with complex magical properties. When Hermione arrived at 6 minutes past 7 with her bag already open and the expression of someone who had been thinking since 5. She sat across from him, put 3 books down, looked at him. Flamel, she said. He looked up. What? She opened the middle book to a bookmarked page. Nicholas Flamel. He's the only known maker of the Philosopher's Stone, a stone that transforms metals to gold and produces the elixir of life. He'd be 600 years old. He's been working with Dumbledore. She turned the book to show him. I found it last night. I've been going around in circles for a month and it was in an entry about medieval alchemists. Harry looked at the entry, at Flamel's name, felt the pieces connect. The stone, he said, that's what's in the 3rd floor corridor. It has to be. Hermione's voice was low and precise. Voldemort, if he's not gone, if something of him survived, it's what he'd want, the elixir of life. He's been without a body for 10 years and the stone would fix that, Harry said. She looked at him with the expression she had when she was about to ask something she'd been approaching obliquely. How long have you thought it was him, the double signature you mentioned? Since the feast. Harry closed his book. Whatever's in Quirrell's turban isn't Quirrell. She absorbed this without visible panic, which he'd come to think of as one of her most significant qualities. The troll, she said. Quirrell let it in. While everyone was in the Great Hall, while the corridor was empty, he paused. Something stopped him that night. Snape was there. Whatever he encountered on the 3rd floor hurt him. I think he's been watching Quirrell. Hermione was quiet for a moment. Her quill was in her hand without her appearing to have picked it up. Snape is protecting the stone. I think Snape knows what it is and thinks the danger is real and isn't willing to wait for someone else to handle it. He thought about the cold, controlled magic he'd felt from Snape all term, the containment, the pressure of it. A man who had made decisions he'd carry until he died and was still carrying them. He's not a comfortable person, Harry said, but I don't think he's the threat. Quirrell, Hermione said, a defense against the dark arts professor who barely sounds coherent and flinches at his own subject, which is perfect cover actually if you're a dark wizard. She stopped. How did you know Snape was counter-jinxing during the match? I felt the threat of the jinx and traced it, during the fall. He said it simply because there was no other way to say it. My awareness works like that. I can feel magical intent sometimes, direction, quality. Hermione's quill tapped her parchment 3 times, like your spider sense. He looked at her, she met his look steadily. You said you'd explain in the common room in November. You didn't because the conversation turned to Flamel and then Christmas happened, but I've been building a model since Charms in October. A pause. The reflexes, the wall thing. The wall thing, Harry repeated. I've seen you in the corridor put your hand against a wall when you're thinking, she said. The contact is too deliberate, and in the troll incident you climbed a vertical stone wall in a dark corridor in approximately 4 seconds. I've been thinking about it for 2 months. Harry looked at her for a moment, then he said, September last year a spider bit me, he told her. All of it, the cupboard, the shimmer of the spider's abdomen, the warmth spreading up his arm, the 11 months of quiet, methodical discovery. The walls, the strength, the sense, the webs which he'd not yet mentioned to anyone. He told her about Ollivander, about the wand's reaction, about 2 voices. He told her about the training on the shed roof and the park at 2 in the morning. Hermione listened with the total stillness of someone processing at maximum capacity. She didn't interrupt once. Her quill didn't move. When he finished, she was quiet for nearly 30 seconds. Then, can I see a web? He checked the library. Empty. He held out his right hand, concentrated on the warm dual-core feeling, pulled the intent forward, and a cord of silvery white material extended from his palm 4 feet long and hit the bookshelf edge with a clean adhesive contact. She stood up, walked to it, bent close without touching it. The substrate is it's not a physical material. It has a magical signature. It's mostly your magic. Yes. It's like conjuration, but it's coming from you, not the wand. She straightened. Her eyes were bright in the way they got when something was very interesting, and she was trying to not appear as excited as she was. And the spider itself, you said it vanished. The colors were wrong. It came from somewhere near the pipes. A crack in the wall, Harry said. I checked it 3 times after. There are places in very old magical buildings where the magical saturation is so high that the boundary between here and somewhere else gets thin, she said, in the careful tone of someone presenting a theory they're not certain about. I read about it in a book on theoretical dimensional magic that Ollivander had on his shelf. I saw it when we were there for your wand, and I went back the next day and asked to borrow it. He let me. She paused. The spider might have come from somewhere that radiation, magical radiation, would interact with organic biology differently. So a nexus point, Harry said. She blinked. That's the term the book used. How did you? Same book. He let me borrow it in November. Harry almost smiled. We should compare notes more often. She sat back down. Her quill was moving now fast, and she had the expression of someone who has found an unexpected companion in a place they thought they were working alone. So your core has 2 components. The standard magical core that would have expressed at Hogwarts regardless, and the spider-derived abilities that interact with the magical core and amplify it. Spider sense is probably your magical perception expressing through a biological system that's been optimized for environmental sensing. She looked up. That's why spells click faster for you. You're processing the magical feedback through 2 parallel systems. That's the model I've been working with, Harry said. More or less, she was writing rapidly. And Dumbledore doesn't know. Nobody does, except you now, he paused. And Ollivander knows something is different. He was careful about the wand. Are you going to tell Dumbledore? Harry thought about this, which he'd already thought about quite a lot. Not yet, he said. I don't know enough about what he'd do with the information, and I don't need his permission to understand my own abilities. Hermione was quiet for a moment. Not disagreement. He knew what her disagreement looked like. It was quicker and more verbal. This was consideration. He might know things that would help you, she said. He might, Harry agreed. I'll get there, when I know enough to have the conversation as an equal rather than as something he's deciding what to do about. She looked at him for a long moment, then wrote something final on her parchment. I want to be there when you tell him, she said. Obviously, Harry said. She almost smiled, which from Hermione was worth considerably more than other people's full expressions. Ron arrived in the library at 8:15 with his chest set under one arm and a look of mild outrage at the hour, took in the open books and the notes and the expression on Hermione's face, and said, What did I miss? With the instinct of someone who has siblings and has learned to detect the specific atmosphere of a conversation that matters. They told him about Flamel, about the stone, about Quirrell. Ron listened with a face that moved through several stages, the slight lean forward that meant engaged, the jaw set that meant taking it seriously, the eyebrow development that meant I want to say something but I'm waiting to see how this lands. And when they finished, he sat back in his chair and said, Right, in a voice that meant he'd made a decision. Right what? Harry asked. Right, so we stop it. Ron said it with a simplicity that was the opposite of naivety. It was the decision of someone who had looked at the situation and calculated that it was unacceptable and was now past the weighing stage. Voldemort's after the stone and Quirrell's helping him, and Dumbledore might not know we stop it. Hermione made a sound that was not quite objection. How exactly? We figure out what's in the room, Ron said. We figure out what the protections are. We work out how to get through them if we have to. He looked at Harry. And we've got a somewhat significant advantage. Somewhat, Harry agreed. What does the 3rd floor actually have? Ron asked. I don't know specifically, Harry said. I know there's something very large, a creature, I think, immediately inside the door, and then the sense of multiple enchantment systems behind it. Right, Ron said. So we need intelligence. He had his chest bored out and was setting pieces up with the automatic movement of someone who thought better while doing something with his hands. Hagrid, he said after a moment. Hagrid knows about magical creatures better than anyone. If we talk to him carefully, he'll tell us more than he intends to, Hermione said, with the slightly guilty tone of someone acknowledging they're going to use something that isn't entirely sporting. He's our friend, Ron said. I'm not going to, I just mean he'll want to help. He worries about us. Harry was watching Ron set the chess pieces and thinking about the quality of the plan developing. It was good. It was exactly the right priority, intelligence before action, understand the system before you engage with it. He'd been thinking along the same lines but hadn't said it yet because he'd been waiting to see where the other 2 landed. They were landing in the right place. Hagrid it is, Harry said. This weekend. Hagrid's hut in January had the specific warmth of a space that contained a very large stove and someone who believed firmly in using it. He opened the door before they knocked. Harry suspected Fang had given him warning, and possibly the spider sense equivalent that any creature with genuine attunement to its environment developed. and ushered them in with the combination of genuine pleasure at their company and slight guilty knowledge that characterized someone who liked people and also had secrets. Harry had brought a bag of rock cakes that Hagrid had given him the recipe for at Christmas, baked correctly, because Harry now knew how to bake correctly, which Hagrid examined with the deep emotion of someone recognizing their own culinary lineage. The conversation found its way to the stone in approximately 11 minutes. Hagrid held out for about 6 of those before his genuine fear for them overcame his sense of institutional loyalty, and he confirmed, yes, the stone was at Hogwarts, yes, it was protected. No, he shouldn't say what the protections were except. Except what? Harry asked gently. Hagrid rubbed his beard, looked at his enormous hands. Except that each of the teachers put something from their own expertise. Dumbledore, McGonagall, Flitwick, Sprout, Quirrell. He stopped. Quirrell, Harry said, and Snape, Hagrid finished, with the specific momentum of someone who realizes mid-sentence they've said more than they meant to. I shouldn't have. A troll, Harry said. I'd guess Quirrell provided a troll. Hagrid's face confirmed it without his saying a word. What did you add? Ron asked. The misery on Hagrid's face was replaced briefly with something else, a flash of private, guilty pleasure. Fluffy, he said. Harry, Hermione, and Ron looked at each other. Fluffy, Harry repeated. Three-headed dog, Hagrid said. Mine, only thing what can get past him is music. He goes right ter sleep. He stopped again. Closed his mouth with the visible effort of someone who has just given away something they absolutely did not mean to. Ron looked at Harry. Hermione was already writing in the small notebook she kept in her pocket for thoughts too good to lose. Thank you, Hagrid, Harry said genuinely, for the tea and the cakes. Yeah, won't. Hagrid looked at them with the worried fondness of someone who already knows the answer. Yeah, won't go up there, will ya? Not unless we have to, Harry said, which was true, he meant it. Going through the trapdoor uninvited would be reckless and unnecessary as long as the stone was still there, and Quirrell hadn't found a way through. What he needed was to understand the sequence, all of it, or as much of it as he could learn, so that if the time came, he went through prepared. He spent the walk back to the castle mentally constructing the sequence, Fluffy, sleeping with music, then whatever the teachers had each contributed. McGonagall's would be transfiguration-based, that was her discipline, and she'd have given it her full competence. Flitwick charms, something that required magical skill. Snape potions, almost certainly, which meant logic as much as magic. Quirrell, that was the one he needed to think about carefully. What had Quirrell contributed, knowing what he knew? Something the traitor believed Quirrell could solve. Something designed to look like an obstacle while actually being a passage. He was still building the map of it when they reached the castle. February came and went in a sequence of events that Harry tracked with the dual awareness he brought to everything, the surface of ordinary school life running alongside the underlying current of what was actually happening. He won 3 Quidditch matches and lost 0. He took to herbology more than he'd expected, because Professor Sprout had the same quality as Hagrid, a deep, uncomplicated expertise in her subject that made her teaching feel like being let in on something real. He got into an argument with Snape in potions that lasted 4 exchanges, and ended with Snape assigning him a detention and then not following through on the detention, which Harry found interesting. The argument had been about the properties of boomslang skin in polyjuice preparation, where Harry had suggested an alternative source of the same alkaloids that Snape had initially dismissed, and then after class, when the other students had left, had gone very still while looking at Harry's notes on the topic, and the detention had simply never materialized. Harry took from this that Snape had more respect for a correct answer than for the performance of authority, and filed it accordingly. March arrived with the specific quality of a thaw, snow receding from the grounds in patches, the grounds turning soft underfoot, the light coming back in a way that changed the feel of the whole castle. Harry did his morning training in the cold air and felt the improvement in his body's responses that had been building since January. His webs now carried him 40 feet with good control. His spider sense had extended its range incrementally all winter. His spells were 2 years ahead of his year group by Flitwick's private assessment. He heard about the Norbert situation because Ron told him, with the aggrieved energy of someone who has watched events spiral and has strong feelings about it. Hagrid's got a dragon egg, Ron said in the common room in the low, controlled voice of someone who has learned from experience that specific topics needed to be handled with the volume down. From someone in the pub in Hogsmeade, which is illegal, and now it's hatching. And he's completely, Ron gestured in the direction of Hagrid's hut with the helpless affection of someone who loves a person's complete inability to resist their own nature. What kind? Harry asked. Norwegian Ridgeback. Harry thought about this. A baby dragon in Hagrid's hut which was wooden. We need to get it out, he said. I know, Ron said. I've been saying, Ron's brothers, Hermione said from her chair in the tone of someone who has already had the solution and was waiting for the right moment. Charlie works with dragons in Romania. If we can get a message to him, he could arrange a pickup. Hedwig could make Romania, Harry said. It's the getting the dragon up the astronomy tower at midnight part I'm worried about, Ron said. At midnight the castle is fairly navigable, Harry said. I know 4 corridors that run from the ground floor to the 7th level without passing a common room or a heavily patrolled section. Ron stared at him. Why do you know that? I mapped the castle in October. Ron looked at Hermione. Did you know he mapped the castle? Yes, Hermione said. When? October, she said. Keep up, Ron. The Norbert operation went almost without a hitch. Almost because the corridor they'd come back through after handing Norbert to Charlie's friends had a prefect in it they hadn't accounted for. Draco Malfoy standing at the base of the astronomy tower stairs with the expression of someone who had been waiting. Because Draco was many things and stupid was not one of them, and he'd apparently noticed a pattern in Hagrid's increased anxiety over the past 2 weeks. He looked at them. He looked at the empty space between Ron and Hermione where a crate had been 60 seconds ago. He looked at Harry. You had a dragon, Draco said flatly. We don't have anything, Ron said. I can smell it, Draco said. Which was Harry hadn't accounted for that and filed it as a lesson in covering your tracks more thoroughly. Draco's expression was complicated in the way it always was around Harry. The dragon, wherever it is now, is the least of your problems. I was going to report you and then I thought. He stopped. His jaw worked. You're doing something else, aren't you? Something bigger. Harry looked at him. Draco looked back. The complicated expression had a new layer, not quite a request, but not far from it. Something's wrong with this school, he said, which was quietly extraordinary from Draco Malfoy. Quirrell, something about Quirrell since September. My father says the man's an embarrassment, but there's something. He stopped again, and Harry could see him being the most honest he'd probably been in months and hating it and doing it anyway. What is it? Harry considered him for a long moment. Not tonight, he said. Get back to your dormitory. You haven't seen us. Draco's eyes narrowed. I'm trying to, I know, Harry said, and I'm telling you to go back to bed. Because if you report us tonight, you won't know what we know, and you'll want to know what we know. He held Draco's gaze. Come to me when you're ready to have a real conversation, not here, not like this. Draco looked at him for 3 more seconds, then turned and walked away, his footsteps fading back toward the Slytherin dormitories. Ron let out a breath. You trusted Malfoy. I gave him a reason to wait, Harry said. Not the same thing. Is there a difference? Hermione asked. Tonight there is, Harry said. They got the detention anyway. Filch found Ron and Hermione returning to the tower via a route that was evidently less clean than Harry had calculated, and Harry surrendered himself alongside them because they'd gone for his plan. McGonagall delivered the detention in the specific tone of someone who expected better and was disappointed in a way that was worse than anger. The detention was in the Forbidden Forest. With Hagrid at midnight. Harry felt the Forbidden Forest the moment they crossed the tree line, an entirely different quality of magic from the castle's structured, ancient weight. This was wild and layered and in places actively hostile, a magic that had been growing unmanaged for centuries and had developed its own logic. His spider sense, which had been tuned high since the tree line, went to a steady, wide-open alert, not danger, not yet, but the awareness that in this environment, danger could come from any direction. They were looking for an injured unicorn. Hagrid explained this with the serious, grieving quality of someone for whom unicorns were not a magical novelty, but a real creature with a right to safety. Harry found the silver blood trail before Hagrid did. He didn't say anything immediately, just tracked it with his eyes and the extended awareness, moving slightly ahead of the group in the way he'd learned to move through unknown environments, letting the spider sense map what the eyes couldn't reach. The forest got denser. The trail went deeper. He felt it before he saw it, something cold. Not cold like temperature, cold like the absence of something living, a magical signature that was less than present, a negative space in the warm, complex forest magic. He stopped. Hagrid, he said quietly, but it came out of the shadows before Hagrid could respond. Harry had a half-second of spider sense spike, not the body danger alert, something else, something directed at the magical core in his chest, a specific wrongness that resonated with the dormant residue in his scar. And then the thing was in the clearing, and it was drinking from the fallen unicorn, and the silver light was extraordinary and terrible. A wraith, hooded, shapeless, barely there. But the magical signature was unmistakable, the same cold alien presence he'd been reading in Quirrell's turban all year, but distilled. Pure, undiluted by a borrowed body or a piece of felt. It looked up. Harry looked back. His scar burned sharp, sudden, the dormant residue responding to the proximity of what had made it. He didn't flinch. He felt the pain register and noted it and held his ground because flinching changed your options and he wasn't interested in having fewer options. The wraith held very still. Harry was absolutely certain, in the way that his spider sense made him certain of physical positions, that what he was looking at was afraid. Not retreating, not fleeing, but the specific freezing stillness of something that has encountered something unexpected and is reevaluating. Something in Harry, some quality of the double core, the merged spider-worm and wizard deep of whatever he was apparently not what this particular remnant of Voldemort had expected to find. He held the look for another second, and then a centaur crashed into the clearing from the right, and the wraith dissolved into the shadow and was gone. Harry breathed out carefully and let his scar settle. The centaur Firenze, who had the eyes of something that had spent its whole life looking further than this moment, regarded Harry with an attention that felt like geological time. "You are not afraid," he said. "No," Harry agreed. "What you carry," Firenze said, which was not quite a question. He felt it, the remnant felt what you carry. His starlit eyes were steady on Harry's. It is not what he expected. "I know," Harry said. "He will not ignore it," Firenze said. "He will want to understand what you are before he moves." "Then I'd better understand it first," Harry said. Firenze regarded him for another long moment. "The centaur herds do not speak prophecy to young humans," he said, as if replying to a different question. "But I will say this, what drinks unicorn blood to survive does not choose easy paths, and what is not yet embodied desires most urgently to be." He turned, moved back into the dark of the forest with the specific grace of something that belongs completely to its environment. Harry stood in the clearing for a moment. Around him, the forest pressed close and wild and ancient. Behind him, Hagrid's lantern was moving closer. He'd heard the commotion and was coming back. He looked at where the wraith had been. He felt what you carry, Firenze had said. Harry thought about that. Thought about what it meant that whatever survived of Voldemort had seen him face to face and chosen to leave rather than engage. Not because it was afraid of his wand or of any specific power he could name, but because of the combination. The thing Harry was, the thing that didn't fit the categories. Voldemort had spent decades terrifying people who had categories for him. He'd built his whole power on being the thing you couldn't face. Harry had no interest in that dynamic, and apparently that registered. He felt something settle in him, not pride, something quieter, a kind of clarity. He'd been building toward it all year, since the cupboard, since September, since the cold Scottish mornings on the ramparts. The picture was almost complete now, almost. Hagrid arrived in a wash of lantern light and anxiety, and Harry turned to meet him with a calm that Hagrid clearly found both reassuring and slightly alarming in an 11-year-old. "Are ya all right?" Hagrid demanded, holding the lantern up. "Fine," Harry said. "I saw it, the thing drinking the unicorn blood." He looked at Hagrid steadily. "It's Voldemort, isn't it, or what's left of him?" Hagrid's face did many things at once. "Now, Harry, we don't." "It's all right," Harry said. "I needed to see it. I needed to know the scale." Hagrid looked at him for a long, troubled moment. "Yes, sound like your dad," he said, which seemed to come out of something deep and true and not at all calculated. "He used to, yes, sound like him." Harry felt that land, let it. "Good," he said quietly. They went back to the castle. April, the ground hardening again, the first green showing at the tree line. 5 months of the school year gone, 1 remaining. Harry was in the common room late, Ron asleep upstairs, Hermione gone at 9 because she had early morning arithmancy, when the portrait hole opened and Draco Malfoy stepped through. Harry looked at him. Draco looked around the empty room with the wariness of someone who has done something they've been thinking about for a long time and is now past the point of unmanning it. He was in his robes, not pajamas. He dressed deliberately for this, which Harry noted and appreciated. He sat down across from Harry with the posture of someone who has decided to do a thing correctly or not at all. "Quirrell," Draco said. "Yes," Harry said. "He went to Dumbledore's office 4 nights ago. I followed him." Draco's voice was flat, controlled, with something underneath it that wasn't quite fear but was adjacent to it. "He didn't go to the door. He stood in the corridor outside and he stopped. The air around him was wrong, cold, like something else was using him." His jaw tightened. "I know what dark magic feels like. I grew up around another stop. I know what it feels like, and that was dark. That was very dark." Harry looked at him. "Why are you telling me?" Draco's expression did something complicated and then settled on something honest. "Because I went to Snape first," he said, which was clearly painful in its admission. "And Snape told me to mind my own business. Which means either he doesn't know or he knows and isn't sharing it with me, which I don't matter to Snape. I never have. A beat. And because you knew, on the train. You've known all year and you're doing something about it." He looked at Harry with an expression that was entirely stripped of the usual Malfoy performance. "I want to help." Harry considered him. Not for long, he'd been building a model of Draco Malfoy since September, adding data points with the methodical thoroughness he brought to all people he found interesting, and the model had been suggesting for 2 months that the person inside the Malfoy performance was someone who'd been told what to value before he understood what value was. Someone who was only now, at 11, beginning to discover the difference between what he'd been given and what he'd chosen. "All right," Harry said. "Here's what we know. he told him. Not everything, not the spider, not the webs, not the specific nature of his magical awareness, but the stone, flame, Quirrell, the protections, the sequence as he understood it, Snape's ambiguous position. Draco listened with a still, precise attention that Harry hadn't seen him apply to anything at Hogwarts before. It was, Harry thought, what he was like when he wasn't performing. When Harry finished, Draco was quiet for a moment. "He's going for it soon," Draco said. "Quirrell, he's been agitated, distracted in class. My father would say that's the face of someone running out of time." "Your father knows this face," Harry said, which was not an accusation but also not an accusation. Draco held his gaze. "My father has made choices I can't defend," he said carefully. "I'm trying to decide what choices I'm going to make." A pause. "This is me choosing." Harry nodded. That was enough. "We need to know if Dumbledore is going to be away from the castle," he said. "If Quirrell is waiting for an opportunity, that's when it happens." "I'll find out," Draco said. He stood, looked at the portrait hole, then back. "Potter." He said it with the effort of someone who has been building to something. "I know I haven't been." He stopped, started again. "I was wrong about Weasley. On the train, I was saying what I'd been taught and I didn't." The sentence ran out. "I know," Harry said. Draco nodded. Left. Harry sat in the quiet of the common room after the portrait hole swung shut and thought about what it cost someone like Draco Malfoy to walk through a Gryffindor portrait hole and sit across from the person he'd been positioned to despise since birth and ask for something honestly. Not nothing at all. He banked the fire and went to bed. The message came from Draco on a Thursday, passed through the specific improbable mechanism of a folded note tucked into Harry's potions textbook between classes. He hadn't seen it happen, which meant Draco had access to his bag for approximately 3 seconds when he'd left it on the bench between classes, which was impressively executed. DD gone Friday. London. Ministry summons. Owl arrived this morning. I was in the owlery. And below that in smaller writing, he's going tonight or tomorrow. Watching him, he smells afraid, and that's worse. Harry held the note in the corridor outside potions, read it twice, and put it in his pocket. He had 2 days. He went to find Ron and Hermione. The conversation in the library was short and specific, no time for ambiguity. He told them what Draco had said. He told them what he thought was coming. He laid out what he knew about the protections in order and what he didn't know about the gaps. Ron's face had the jaw-set expression that meant past the weighing stage. Hermione's eyes were moving quickly through internal considerations and coming out on the far side of them. She looked at him. "You know we have to go through," she said. "If he gets to the stone," "I know," Harry said. "We should tell McGonagall," she said. We should, Harry agreed. "I'm going to try. If she listens, this is her problem and Dumbledore's, not ours." He paused. "But we should be ready for the possibility that she doesn't listen to 3 11-year-olds without evidence." "And then?" Ron asked. Harry thought about the Forbidden Forest, about Ference's voice, about the Wraith looking at him and holding still. "And then we go through ourselves," he said, "and we end it." He said it without drama. It was just the next step. Outside, April was deepening toward May, and the castle's ancient magic settled around them with the patience of something that had seen many endings and beginnings and knew the difference between the two. Chapter 5. Through the Trapdoor. McGonagall didn't listen. Not because she was stupid, she was the opposite of stupid, and Harry had spent 8 months learning to read her, and he could see in the precise tension of her expression that she was hearing them and filing it and finding it insufficient. She stood behind her desk with her hands flat on the surface and looked at them with the controlled concern of someone who cares and cannot let the caring change the protocol. "What you're describing," she said, "is speculation built on speculation. A magical sensitivity you haven't demonstrated to any staff member, an interpretation of Professor Quirrell's behavior that could be attributed to his general." "He let the troll in," Harry said, "on Halloween. There is no evidence of that. His leg was injured on the 3rd floor the same night Snape was up there trying to stop someone getting through." Harry kept his voice level and clear. "I can feel magical intent, Professor. I know how that sounds, but I felt the jinx during the Quidditch match and I traced it to Quirrell and I felt Snape counter-jinxing from the stands." McGonagall looked at him for a long moment. The kind of look that was genuinely trying to find the line between a child's overconfidence and something that warranted action. Harry could see her wrestling with it honestly, which he respected even while it frustrated him. "Even if I credited everything you've said," she said finally, "the matter of the stone's protection is not yours to manage. It is Dumbledore's concern and the headmaster has made provisions. Dumbledore is going to be in London tomorrow," Harry said. "He's already been called." A beat of silence. McGonagall's expression shifted barely, but his eyes caught it. She hadn't known. "Where did you hear that?" she said carefully. "Reliable source," Harry said. He wasn't going to give up Draco. "The Ministry summoned him this morning, which means if Quirrell is waiting for an opportunity, he has it." McGonagall straightened. She looked at the 3 of them, Harry, Hermione with her notebook, Ron with his jaw set and his hands quiet in his lap. She was doing the calculation that adults did when they were deciding how seriously to take the young. "I will look into it," she said. "Return to your dormitory." It was not a yes. It was not a number, it was the response of an institution to something that might require action, which meant the institution would take approximately as long as institutions always took. Harry thanked her, meant it, walked out. In the corridor, Ron said, "She's not going to move fast enough." "No," Harry agreed. Hermione had her notebook open. "We go tonight," she said, "not tomorrow." "If Quirrell is moving and Dumbledore is already gone, tonight," Harry agreed. He'd already decided. He decided before they went to McGonagall because going to McGonagall had been the right thing to do and he'd done it, and now he knew its result and the next step was clear. "I'll get the cloak," he said. "Meet me in the common room at midnight." The castle at midnight was the castle at its most honest. No students in the corridors, no teachers on predictable patrol routes. Harry knew Snape walked the dungeons from 11 to 1 on Fridays. Knew Filch did the main staircases on the hour. Knew the third-floor corridor had a patrol gap between 12:15 and 12:40 that had existed all year because the patrolling teacher was Quirrell and Quirrell had stopped going near it in March. He'd mapped all of this without particular intention, just the natural accumulation of an awareness that cataloged everything. They moved under the cloak. 3 people under one cloak was awkward but workable if they stayed tight, and they'd practiced it once in November out of what had seemed like abstract precaution. The castle's ambient magic pressed around them, warm and layered and ancient, and Harry's spider sense was running in a wide, attentive mode, reading the building around him. He felt Quirrell before they reached the third-floor corridor. Not the double signature in its usual form, something had changed. The overlay was more pronounced, the cold alien presence pressing harder against the surface, as if whatever lived underneath had stopped bothering to stay underneath. His scar gave a single, sharp pulse of warmth that he breathed through and filed and kept moving. "He's ahead of us," Harry said quietly. "He's already there." "How far?" Hermione asked. 60 feet, maybe less." Ron said nothing, which was his version of committed. They came around the corner and the door to the third-floor corridor was open. Open, not forced, no signs of struggle, which meant either Quirrell had a means of opening it that they didn't know about or Dumbledore had left it open for reasons Harry couldn't yet parse. The corridor beyond was dark and the air from it was different, heavier, carrying the scent of something very large and alive. Harry pulled the cloak off. There was no point in it now. They were going through and moving fast was more useful than moving invisible. "Ready?" he said. "No," Ron said, which meant yes. They went through. Fluffy was asleep. Harry heard the music before he saw the source, a small enchanted harp sitting on the stone floor near the wall, playing itself with the repetitive, slightly mechanical quality of a spell left running. Quirrell had thought of it. That was the thing that bothered Harry as he looked at the sleeping dog, 3 enormous heads, each one the size of a small car, breathing in the slow rhythm of something deeply under. Quirrell had known about the music. Had known every step of this in advance. The trapdoor in the floor beneath one vast paw was open. "He's already through," Harry said. "The harp will stop eventually," Hermione said. "When the spell runs down, Fluffy wakes up." "How long?" Ron asked. She looked at the harp. 20 minutes, maybe 30. Harry was already at the trapdoor. He looked down into the dark below and felt the space with his awareness, a long drop but not vertical, and at the bottom something soft, vegetative that his magical sense registered as active and hungry. He looked up at the other 2. "Devil's snare at the bottom," he said. "Don't struggle when you land. It responds to movement. The more you fight it, the tighter it holds. Stay still and it'll loosen." "Light," Hermione said immediately. "It retreats from light and heat." "Yes, wand's ready before you hit." He looked at them both for a moment in the way he looked at things that mattered. "If at any point it goes badly wrong, it won't," Ron said. "If it does," Harry said, "you both go back up through the trapdoor and out. You get McGonagall, you get Snape, you get anyone. Don't argue about that decision when it comes, just make it." Hermione nodded. Ron nodded with slightly less patience but genuinely. Harry went through the trapdoor first, dropping into the dark below, and felt the devil's snare catch him like a net of vines and went absolutely still. He felt it tighten once, testing, and then against all its instincts begin to loosen in response to his complete non-reaction. He felt the weirdness of it, the way the plant's magical awareness processed his stillness as defeat and released what it couldn't make struggle. He lit his wand before Ron came through. The light hit the snare and it retreated in curling tendrils and all 3 of them dropped through to the stone floor below. They ran. The second chamber held birds, not birds. Keys, hundreds of them, silver-winged and flying in a churning mass under a high stone ceiling. And below them 2 broomsticks, and a lock on the door ahead that needed a specific key. Harry looked at the lock, then up at the mass of keys, then at the broomstick and picked it up. "There'll be one that's been used recently," Hermione said. Quirrell went through, look for bent wings, a different flight pattern. Harry was already in the air. His eyes moved over the swarm with the visual acuity that had been sharpening since September and found it in 6 seconds, a large silver key with a bright blue wing that was distinctly bent where someone had grabbed it hard in a hurry. He went after it. The keys tried to mob him. He moved through them with the fluid three-dimensional control of someone for whom aerial obstacle courses were training rather than challenge, banking left, dropping, coming up under the target key's flight path, and catching it one-handed with the same clean snap that had caught the snitch in every match this year. Landed, unlocked the door, through. The chess set was enormous. Giant stone pieces ranked on either side of a board the size of the corridor, the far door visible beyond the black pieces. Ron looked at it with the expression of someone who has been preparing for one specific thing their entire life without knowing it. "I can get us through," he said. "We need to play our way across." Harry looked at him. "You're sure?" Ron was already looking at the board with the focused, quiet intensity Harry had seen from him in the Gryffindor common room 100 times. "White moves first in chess. We're black, we let them open and then I'll show you what to do. Harry, you're a bishop. Hermione, that rook. I'll take the knight." They took their positions. The white pieces moved. Ron played, and Harry watched him do it with the clear, uncomplicated admiration of someone watching a person be completely excellent at the thing they're completely excellent at. Ron didn't hesitate, didn't second-guess. He played 3 moves ahead with the natural, fluid authority of someone for whom the board was a language he'd been born speaking. The black pieces moved when Ron directed them. The white pieces fell knight, then bishop, then a rook that took Harry's bishop, and Harry stepped aside for it exactly as Ron had said, because Ron had said it was the play and Ron was right. The white queen was the problem. She was devastating and brilliant, and Ron had been moving around her for 6 moves, limiting her influence, and finally he looked at his knight himself, the piece he was standing in for, and looked at the board and looked at Harry. "I let her take me," he said. "She takes the knight and Harry gets clear to the king's position." He said it with the specific steadiness of someone who has calculated and isn't afraid of the answer. "It's the winning move." "Ron, it's chess, Harry." He looked at him directly. "I'll take the knock, you win the game." Harry held his gaze. "You're sure?" "I've been sure for 3 moves," Ron said, and it was the truest and most uncomplicated thing Harry had heard all night. He looked at Hermione. "Get him out the other side. You know as much as he does, and you're brilliant at magic, and he's..." He looked back at Harry. "He's going to need you for whatever's ahead." "I'll be fine. The pieces here follow the rules. It won't be serious." Harry moved. The knight moved. The white queen crossed the board with the cold implacability of the best piece on the board, and Ron went down with the impact and the sound of stone on stone, and Harry's spider sense was already telling him non-fatal, and he let himself believe it and kept moving, through the door, into the dark. He heard Hermione behind him and felt her presence there, solid and certain, and they ran. The next room smelled of something rotten and enormous, and Harry and Hermione cast the required spell together. Hermione had worked out from first principles what creatures scent that would be, and she'd been right, and it took them less than a minute and they kept moving. The potions room was Snape's. 7 bottles in a line, a logic puzzle in verse on a rolled piece of parchment. Hermione picked it up, read it in 15 seconds, read it again, and pointed at the smallest bottle on the right end of the line. "Forward," she said. "That one." "You're certain?" Harry said. "The logic is Snape's," she said, with a flat certainty that made argument pointless. "It's elegant and unambiguous, and if you understand the premise, the answer is clear. That one gets you forward." She looked at the others. "This one, the round bottle in the middle, back." She looked at him. They both knew there was only one dose for forward. "You go back," he said. "Get Ron, get out, get McGonagall and anyone else and tell them everything." "Harry, Hermione," he said it simply. "I can feel what's in the next room. I've been able to feel it since the forest. I know what I'm walking into." He held her gaze. "You know everything I know. Tell it to the right people. That's not a lesser task." She looked at him with an expression he'd never seen on her face before, not fear exactly, but the specific, painful recognition of someone who is being trusted completely and finds the trust both a comfort and a weight. She pressed the forward bottle into his hand and held it for a moment longer than she needed to. "Come back," she said, "not please, just the statement of an expectation." "Yes," he said. He drank and went through the black flames. The last room was not what he'd expected, which meant his model had been slightly wrong, which was worth noting. No trap. No enchantment guarding this final space. Just a chamber with a high domed ceiling, lit by some sourceless light that made shadows go in wrong directions, and at the far end the mirror of Arist, the same mirror he'd read about in the texts, tall and gold-framed, its surface the deep, particular darkness of a mirror that showed something other than reflection. And Quirrell standing before it with his back to the door. He didn't turn immediately. Harry came through the flames and stood in the room, and his spider sense mapped everything at once. One person standing, the mirror 10 feet ahead, the wrongness radiating from the turban at close range like heat from a fire. The double signature, which had been misaligned and overlaid all year, was now running parallel, as if the presence underneath had stopped pretending to be underneath. His scar pulsed, he noted it. I wondered when you'd arrive, Quirrell said, and his voice was different, the stutter gone, stripped away, revealing whatever was underneath the performance, clear and precise. Earlier than I expected, the others slowed you less than they should have. They slowed Quirrell, Harry said. I'm not Quirrell. The man turned. His face was the same stammering professor's face, but the quality of it had changed. The inhabitation of it was different, something using it more completely, wearing it as a surface rather than a home. His eyes were fixed on Harry with an attention that was too old for the body it was in. Harry looked at the mirror. The frame was elaborate and the inscription across the top read backwards, and he knew what it meant from the texts. I show not your face but your heart's desire. He looked back at Quirrell. You can't get the stone from it, Harry said. No, Quirrell agreed. Only someone who wants to find the stone, not use it, can take it from the mirror. Clever enchantment. Dumbledore's work, he is occasionally brilliant. A pause. You might be able to get it. I know, Harry said, so you see the situation. Yes, Harry said pleasantly. You need me to get the stone, you won't get it any other way, and you've run out of time. Dumbledore will be back, and whatever you've been trying all year has failed, and this is your last attempt. He tilted his head. You're not actually asking me to get it for you. That's not why you brought this up. You're stalling. Something moved across Quirrell's borrowed expression. Not quite surprise, more the recalibration of someone who had expected a different kind of opponent. He wants to see you, Quirrell said after a moment, up close. He's been curious since the forest. Harry's scar burned steadily. He'd been managing it for 5 minutes. He had the capacity to manage it further. I know, Harry said. The feeling was mutual. Quirrell reached up with both hands and began unwinding the turban. Harry watched without moving. His spider sense was running at its highest calibration, not signaling danger as much as total, complete awareness. Every variable in the room tracked simultaneously. The door behind him, Quirrell's hands, the mirror to his right, the magical temperature of the room. The turban fell. The back of Quirrell's head had a face in it. That was the only way to describe it. A face pressed outward from the inside, as if something had been growing behind the skull and had reached the surface. It was chalk-white and noseless and red-eyed, and the eyes opened and found Harry with an immediacy that suggested they'd already known exactly where he was. The feeling that came off the face was extraordinary, a concentrated, ancient, cold, dark magic that pressed against Harry's awareness like a physical force. The residue in his scar resonated with it, the way two strings on the same pitch vibrate when one is plucked. Harry felt it all register, held his ground. Harry Potter, said the face on the back of Quirrell's head, and the voice was not Quirrell's voice at all, thin and high, and carrying the specific quality of something very powerful that was also currently very constrained. At last. Voldemort, Harry said, not a greeting, just the acknowledgement of a name. The red eyes did something, not fear, nothing that physical, but a very slight, very controlled tightening. Wariness. He was doing what Firenze had said he would, looking for the shape of what Harry was before deciding how to engage. You're not afraid, Voldemort said. Should I be? Harry asked. Every person who has ever stood where you are standing has been afraid of me, Voldemort said with the calm certainty of someone stating a fact they've verified many times. Even those more powerful than you, even those who ultimately defeated me. Nobody's defeated you, Harry said. You're still here. As are you. The red eyes studied him. What are you? Harry said nothing. He was looking at the mirror. The magical core in you is not standard, Voldemort said. I felt it in the forest. There is something wound through your magic, something that is not magic precisely but interacts with it. A pause. I have spent 10 months in this vessel trying to understand it, and I cannot. 50 years ago I would have simply taken what I needed and moved on. But this, the eyes narrowed, this is something I have not encountered. Good, Harry said. I could have you killed, Voldemort said, and it was almost conversational. Quirrell is a functional body. I could direct his wand and end this quickly. You could try, Harry said. He wasn't being brave about it, he was being accurate. But you haven't yet, which means you're not certain what happens if you try. And you're not a person who likes uncertainty. The red eyes held him. Harry held them back. The stone, Voldemort said after a moment. Get the stone from the mirror and I will tell you what I know about your scar, about what I left in you, about what you are. I already know what I am, Harry said. You know what the spider gave you, Voldemort said, which landed in the room with a particular weight because Harry hadn't told anyone about the spider except Hermione, and the spider's existence should be unknown to anything. What you don't know is what I gave you, the night I killed your parents. The night my curse split and something lodged in your scar that was not supposed to be there. A pause. A piece of me, Potter, living in you, growing with you. Woken perhaps by whatever your little arachnid friend did to your magical core. Harry was still. He felt it, the dormant thing in the scar, the thing he'd always noted and filed and decided to understand eventually. He felt it with new clarity, the way you see a shape in a dark room when someone finally turns on the light, and it was exactly what Voldemort was describing. A presence, a lodged fragment of something. He processed this for exactly 3 seconds, then he looked at the mirror. He walked to it. Quirrell made a sound. Quirrell, the person underneath, who was still there in some diminished form, fighting his own body's puppet strings. Harry felt it, the desperate, overwhelmed quality of someone who had made choices they regretted and was paying for them in the most complete and awful way. He looked into the mirror. His reflection looked back. Not different, not dressed in something else, not with the Philosopher's Stone held aloft in triumph. Just Harry himself, exactly as he was in his Hogwarts robes with the dust of 6 challenges on them and his wand in his hand, looking at himself, looking calm. He felt something happen. A weight in his pocket that hadn't been there before, a small, warm, solid thing that had simply appeared because he had looked at the mirror and wanted only to prevent its use and not to use it himself. And Dumbledore's enchantment had done exactly what it was designed to do. His hand closed around it in his pocket. Small, dense, warm with a specific concentrated magical signature unlike anything else he'd touched. The Philosopher's Stone. He didn't move for a moment, just stood with it. "You have it," Voldemort said, and the voice had changed, something urgent and barely controlled beneath the thin surface. "Give it to me, Potter, give it to." Harry turned. He looked at Quirrell, at the face on the back of the head, the red eyes, the cold ancient presence, and said, "Number." The word landed in the room with a weight that surprised even him. Not loud, just absolute. "You don't understand what you're preventing," Voldemort said, and now there was something almost earnest in the terrible voice, something that believed its own argument. "My return is inevitable. I have survived death once. I will survive this diminishment. I will come back with or without the stone, and the delay is only a delay then," Harry said. "That's what I'm buying." "Your life is mine," Harry said. "It's been mine since September. You don't get a piece of it." Voldemort's eyes went very still. "Seize him," he said to Quirrell, not a demand. A command. Quirrell launched toward him and Harry moved, not back, sideways and then in, which was the approach Quirrell hadn't anticipated because the approach in the narrow space between mirror and wall was the one that eliminated Quirrell's wand arm. Harry's hand caught Quirrell's wrist and held. The pain was instantaneous and extraordinary, not from Quirrell, from the contact itself. His scar detonated in a burst of white heat that should have dropped him, and didn't because he'd been managing it for 20 minutes, and had built a relationship with the pain that was not acceptance, but was not panic either. And from his hands, wherever he gripped Quirrell's skin, something was happening. The magical signatures were reacting. His double core, the spiderworm and the wizard deep, was doing something at the point of contact that he'd never felt before. Quirrell screamed, not from anything Harry had done deliberately. The contact, the specific quality of what Harry's fused, doubled magic did at a direct physical point, was apparently catastrophic for whatever lived in Quirrell's skin. The face on the back of the head was twisting, and Voldemort was saying something in a tone that had abandoned the thin, controlled precision and gone to something more primal, and Quirrell was on his knees. Harry held on. He didn't know if this was the right choice. He knew it was a choice, and he was making it with full information and full intent, and the stone was in his pocket, and Quirrell was between him and whatever came next, and he was not letting go. The screaming went very loud and then stopped. Not gradually. Suddenly, like a light going out, the silence was complete. Harry was on the floor. He registered this distantly. He'd gone down at some point. He wasn't certain when. The pain in his scar had crescendoed past anything he had a framework for, and his body had apparently made its own decisions. He was on the cold stone, and his hands were flat against the floor, and the stone was still in his pocket, still warm, and the chamber was quiet. He pushed himself up on one arm, looked around. Quirrell was on the floor, not unconscious, something more than unconscious. The still, permanent quality of something that had been used up completely by whatever had inhabited it and whose last act of will had been insufficient. Harry looked at him for a long moment. The double signature was gone. Not both of them. Quirrell's was gone. The cold alien presence was diminished. Not gone entirely, because he could still feel the residue in his own scar, like a reminder, like a bruise. But it had retreated back into the only vessel it had left, which was the one it had made by accident on a night 10 years ago in Godric's Hollow. Harry sat up fully, breathed. The stone was in his pocket. Quirrell was dead. Voldemort was somewhere, formless and furious and diminished, receding into whatever dark nowhere a consciousness retreats to when its body fails. Not gone, he knew that. Firenze had known it too. He will survive this diminishment, Voldemort had said, and Harry believed him because Voldemort had survived worse. But not tonight. He got to his feet. The chamber was exactly as still as it had been. The sourceless light hadn't changed. The mirror reflected his own battered, dust-covered, 11-year-old self back at him, and he looked at his reflection for a moment and thought, more information about the scar. There's a piece of him in there, and that's the next problem. After this one is done. He put the stone carefully in his inner pocket, walked to the door, went back through the black flames alone. Dumbledore found him in the potions room. Harry was sitting against the wall with his wand across his knees, managing what remained of the pain in his scar with the steady, methodical focus he brought to difficult things. When the black flames guttered and went cold, and Dumbledore stepped through from the far side with a quality of movement that suggested he'd had slightly more warning than the timeline implied. He looked at Harry for a moment that contained several things at once. Harry looked back. He'd been thinking about this conversation since November. Since Ollivander's. Since the moment he'd decided not to seek Dumbledore out and had started gathering the information to have the meeting as an equal. He wasn't certain he was quite there yet, but close. Quirrell is dead, Harry said. Voldemort was inhabiting him, has been all year. The stone is safe. He reached into his pocket and held it out. I'd suggest somewhere better than a guarded room in a school next time. Dumbledore crossed the chamber with a pace that was faster than his usual considered movement and took the stone from Harry's hand and looked at it, and then looked at Harry with the eyes of someone who has spent a long time believing they know the shape of a situation and has just discovered they don't. Are you injured? He said. My scar, Harry said. It hurts. Less than it did. He met the blue eyes. I know what the scar is, he told me. Dumbledore went very still. A Horcrux, Harry said, because he'd worked the concept out from his reading on dark magic theory over the past 2 weeks since the forest, had put the piece Voldemort had given him tonight alongside the texts he'd found in the restricted section and had arrived at the only answer that fit. A piece of his soul. He put it in me by accident the night he killed my parents. The silence in the chamber was total. Dumbledore sat down on the floor. Not in a chair, there were no chairs, but on the cold stone, cross-legged, with the unself-conscious quality of someone for whom propriety has just become irrelevant. He looked at Harry with an expression Harry had never seen on an adult's face before, complete unmanaged honesty. You should not know that yet, Dumbledore said quietly. No, Harry agreed, but I do. He held the old man's gaze. I also know it's why you've been managing me, keeping a certain distance, watching not because you don't care, because you do, and it complicates things. He paused. I'm not angry about it, but it's going to stop. Harry, I'm the one carrying it, Harry said. It's in me, it has been for 10 years. I have a right to know what that means and what the options are and what you know about both. He said it clearly, without heat, with the same direct steadiness he brought to everything that mattered. I'm not asking you to treat me like an adult. I'm asking you to treat me like someone with relevant information and a stake in the outcome, which is what I am. Dumbledore looked at him for a very long time. The blue eyes, sharp, layered, carrying a history Harry would never fully know, moved over him with something Harry could only describe as reckoning. The calculation of someone who has spent decades arranging pieces and has encountered a piece that refuses to be arranged. You are, Dumbledore said finally, not what I expected. I know, Harry said. The spider, Dumbledore said. Harry looked at him. There are nexus points in old magical houses, Dumbledore said with the careful tone of someone offering what they know honestly. I knew there was one in Privet Drive. I did not know what had come through it. A pause. I should have checked. Yes, Harry said simply. What I should and should not have done, Dumbledore said, is a list I am adding to this evening. He looked at the stone in his hands and then at Harry, and the expression that settled on his face was something Harry thought might be the beginning of a different kind of conversation, not management, not manipulation, but the honest reckoning of two people who needed each other to have different roles than they'd been playing. The Horcrux, Harry said. Tell me, Dumbledore told him. He told him what a Horcrux was, the technical reality of it, the dark magic involved, the specific horror of soul-splitting. He told him what he suspected and what he knew. He told him with the precision of someone who has decided to stop managing and start being honest, that he had known for 2 years and had been building a plan and had not found a way to include Harry in it that didn't feel like using him. Harry listened, filed everything, let it be as big and dark as it was. When Dumbledore finished, Harry sat with it for a moment. The piece in me, Harry said. Is it affecting me? I believe, Dumbledore said carefully, that your particular situation has complicated the Horcrux's influence. The additional core, the spider-derived magic, it may have contained it, surrounded it. I have never seen anything like what you described happening to Quirrell at the moment of contact, but I wonder, he paused. I wonder if your fused core acts as a kind of suppressor or something more. A weapon, Harry said. Potentially, Dumbledore said, potentially something more elegant than that. He looked at Harry with the focused, genuine attention of someone who has given up pretending. Harry, I have been very careful with you this year and very wrong about what careful meant. I thought keeping you unaware was protection. I see now it was control, Harry said, not accusing, just naming. Yes, Dumbledore said, and the word cost him something visible. Control. Dressed as protection, which is the most convenient costume for control. He looked at his hands. Your parents were remarkable people. Your mother in particular had a quality of magical perception that I have not encountered since your particular fused core is not entirely without precedent in her line. I should have considered, you can tell me about her, Harry said. Properly. Not in the way people tell me about her to comfort me or to make me feel the weight of something. He held the old man's gaze. Tell me about her like she was a real person. Dumbledore looked at him. The blue eyes were wet, which was not something Harry had imagined he'd ever see, and which he filed with everything else this extraordinary evening had produced. She was extraordinary, Dumbledore said, and furious when she needed to be, and the most precise magical thinker of her generation. A pause. She would have been so proud tonight that she would have been absolutely insufferable about it. Harry almost smiled. Felt it pull at his face honestly, unguardedly, the way things pulled at you when they were real. He let it. He found Ron and Hermione in the hospital wing the next morning. Ron was awake and eating toast with the determined focus of someone making up for lost time, his arm in a sling, his face carrying a bruise along the jaw that he would be very proud of for approximately 3 weeks. He looked up when Harry came in and his face did the thing it did when he was feeling something strongly and wasn't going to say all of it. Stone, he said. Safe, Harry said. Quirrell, gone, Ron nodded. Ate another piece of toast. I beat Hermione at chess twice while you were in there, he said. She was distracted waiting and I exploited it shamelessly. I let you win the second time, Hermione said from the adjacent bed, which she was sitting on rather than lying in, with 3 books open around her and the notebook in her hand. She looked at Harry with the expression she'd had in the potions chamber doorway, the one that was an expectation fulfilled. I told McGonagall everything, she said. And she told Dumbledore, who was already on his way back because apparently the ministry summons was a trap set by Quirrell through connections. It was cancelled within an hour of it being sent and Dumbledore was already returning. She paused. He knew, he let things play out. He told me, Harry said. He sat on the edge of Ron's bed. He knows more than he was telling, he's going to tell more going forward. Is he? Hermione said with the measured skepticism of someone who files promises under pending verification. He will, Harry said. He thought about the old man on the cold stone floor with his hands open. He's recalibrating. Good, Ron said. Can someone explain the Horcrux thing? Hermione told me the version she had and it was extensive, but she was also writing while she was talking, so I may have missed parts. Hermione looked at Ron. I was not writing, I was taking notes. Those are the same thing, Ron said, Harry told him. All of it the version Dumbledore had given him and the conclusions he'd drawn himself. Ron listened in his usual way, the full-body, genuine attention that he brought to things that mattered, without the need to appear intelligent about it while processing. When Harry finished, Ron was quiet for a moment. So there's a piece of him in your scar, Ron said. Yes, and it's been there since you were a baby. Yes, and your spider situation might be containing it or something. Possibly. Ron thought about this for another moment. Then he looked at Harry with the direct, uncomplicated honesty that was his defining quality. Does it bother you? He asked. Not that I mean not the practical problem of it. Does it bother you, being a thing you didn't choose in you without asking? Harry looked at him, thought about the cupboard in September, about the shimmer of the spider's abdomen, about 11 months of figuring out what he was. He thought about the cold, clear morning on the ramparts and the swing through the park at 2 in the morning and the choice he'd made sitting in the Sorting Hat with Hogwarts around him. Everything significant that's happened to me, Harry said, I didn't choose in advance, I chose what to do with it after. He paused. The Horcrux is the next one, I'll figure it out. Ron looked at him for a moment and then nodded with the simplicity of someone who has understood something real. Right, he said, we'll figure it out. Hermione looked up from her notebook. I've already started a reading list, she said. The morning sun was coming through the hospital wing windows in long, warm angles, laying itself across the white sheets and the stone floor, and the 3 of them in the particular way that mornings have when something significant has finished, and something new hasn't quite started yet. Harry sat in it and felt the dual hum of his core settling, the spider-worm and the wizard deep, the extraordinary accident that had become the most essential thing about him. The scar pulsed faintly, not painfully, just presently. The piece of Voldemort dormant again, surrounded by whatever it was that Harry was. It could wait. He'd come back to it with more information on his own terms. He leaned back against the wall. Ron was offering him toast, with the generous instinct of someone who considered food the appropriate response to most serious events. Hermione was writing something that would probably be organized into a comprehensive document by the end of the day. Outside the windows, Hogwarts was waking into a June morning, the grounds green and bright, the lake glittering, the towers catching light. He'd done what he'd come through that trapdoor to do. He'd do what came next when he knew what it was. For now there was toast and the warmth of the castle and the solid, specific, real company of the two people who had gone through 6 enchanted rooms because it was the right thing to do and had not needed to be asked twice. That was enough to build on. Everything else could be figured out. The end of year 1.